I relaxed, almost calmed down. Allison and I enjoyed cocktails and appetizers at Duke's on Waikiki Beach. The sun was setting, and there was still one more day of conference ahead. Our flight left Honolulu for Lihue on Kauai on Friday morning for 7 days of just Ollie and I, with no work worries. Suddenly, I saw the senior regional manager for the Western region heading towards us. I knew that I would need to find time to communicate with him. This was always one of the goals of these meetings. Try to impress management. Since our hotel was next door to Duke's, it was not surprising to see other Pincus employees there. This was one of the things I liked least about these sales conferences. Everyone was trying to attract the attention of senior management. I knew I had to do everything to get the attention I needed. "Honey, I'll be right back. Don Clemens is at the bar, and I need to talk to him for a few minutes," I told Allison. She simply nodded and continued drinking her Mai Tai. She had nothing to complain about. Ollie loved luxury. We managed to grab one of the tables right next to the beach. The temperature was pleasant, and the sounds of the ocean created a relaxing atmosphere. The sun was about to set, and we were in the front row for this show. I looked back, heading towards Clemens. Ollie didn't seem to mind at all that I wasn't at the table. She enjoyed the atmosphere of Hawaii, regardless of my presence. I made my way through the crowd that had gathered around Clemens. Some of the more ambitious Pincus Labs employees were already trying to spend time with our boss. In the highly competitive world of global pharmaceutical sales, even company meetings became a zero-sum game. "Great information today, Dawn." I was finally able to start a conversation with Clemens at the bar at Duke's. "In fact, I've already started strategizing about the placement of some new products," I continued. He showed some interest, but wasn't particularly impressed with my comments just yet, but at least he was listening. Mentally, I was organizing the next few parts of my conversation with him. I knew from experience that my time with Clemens was limited. I probably had no more than 2 or 3 minutes before I ran out of sand in my watch. Just as I was about to explain my next and most important point, I felt a sharp blow to my kidney. I turned to see who pushed me. It was Angela Ridley. My delay was her chance. She quickly and deftly squeezed into the situation and got her time to communicate with the boss. Earlier that day, I made a comment in one of our discussions. Angela criticized my position without offering any solutions. She was someone who was always looking for the negative. After a brief pause from the blow, I tried to engage Clemens again, but now he was talking to Angela. Just like in basketball, she physically forced me out of the situation. Although I didn't get all my thoughts across to Don, I felt like I got at least some attention, but he was now occupied with the short, negative, plump Angela. She outsmarted me. Bitch. My duty almost completed, I began to return to my table, consoling myself that soon this conference would be over, and Allison and I would be on vacation, free from thoughts of Pincus Labs, Don Clemens, and, of course, Angela Ridley. On my way to the table, I suddenly felt a friendly hand on my back. "Damn, she's a real bitch," I heard. It was a new colleague, Adrian Vasquez, who worked in the Portland office like me. He had been at Pincus for less than a year and always seemed friendly. He was also considered a rising star in Pincus. I looked at him questioningly without saying a word. "Angela," he said, "I saw how she pushed you out. It's a shame Clemens didn't see what she really was like. There is an old saying, 'The enemy of your enemy is your friend.'" With this spirit, I suddenly saw Adrian as a potential new ally. "She's definitely a bitch," I agreed, looking back at Clemens and seeing how short, wide Angela continued to monopolize his attention. We spent a few minutes discussing it, but the conversation quickly fizzled out. The atmosphere was too wonderful to waste time on negative thoughts. Like Angela Ridley. "I like this place, Mike," Adrian commented, looking around. "It's hard to find a table. This bar is always crowded." After some thought and looking around, I noticed an empty chair. "Why don't you join us? We have a great place," I suggested. Vasquez hesitated for a moment, but soon agreed. We walked to our table, and I introduced him to Allison. At first, she was a little unhappy that our time together was being interrupted by the Pincus people, but Adrian was pleasant, charming, and funny. Soon Allison relaxed and enjoyed his company. I looked at Vasquez, perhaps an inch or two taller than my 6-foot frame, slimmer, with sleek dark hair and an olive skin tone. Cute in a slightly exotic style, and now we had a common enemy, Angela. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" asked Adrian. "No," I answered. "Morning wrap and award ceremony ends at 11 am given Pincus. We'll be done by 10:15 or 10:30 tops. Ollie and I leave for Kauai in Hawaii at 2 p.m. We're there for a week." Allison smiled and grabbed my hand under the table, excited and happy about the upcoming holiday. He smiled quietly at us, seeming genuinely happy for us. But when we talked about going to Kauai, his face darkened. He quickly recovered and asked where we would stay on Kauai. "We're on the Poipu side at Kaloa Landing," Allison answered. She organized the holiday and did a good job. With the help of Marriott points and some negotiation, she got a great deal on a very nice hotel. Without a doubt, Ollie loved holidays. Vasquez asked about the hotel, location, and activities on Kauai. Ollie told him all about the place and the wonderful things to do there. He seemed genuinely interested, and Ollie's conversations about how wonderful Kauai was made me want to be there now. There was a moment when Vasquez became quieter, and I noticed that for a moment sadness had crept into the conversation. I changed the subject. "Are you flying home tomorrow?" I asked him. "I'm not sure, Mike," he replied. Ollie and I looked at him in surprise. "Not sure" sounded strange. "What do you mean?" I asked. Then he started a long story about a certain friend who was originally going to join him on Oahu, and they planned to stay in Honolulu for a week. They had planned this months ago, but it seems things have cooled, and now she doesn't seem to be coming. I got a refund on my Marriott Waikiki booking, but changing my flight would cost a fortune, and I already had a week of vacation planned, he told us. "I'm not sure what I'll do." "Adrian," Ollie began, "you're in Hawaii. Your flight is paid for. You're on vacation. Plan an adventure. There are so many great places on Oahu and the other islands. Lots of things to do." For a moment, I thought she was going to invite him to Kauai with us. I didn't want this. He's a nice guy, but our vacation was supposed to be just the two of us. "You're right, Allison," he replied, smiling. "Thank you, you're absolutely right." With these words, he raised his glass in a toast and clinked it with my wife. They looked at each other for a moment, and then they clinked glasses with me. Kauai was phenomenal again. As soon as the Hawaiian flight left Honolulu and landed in Lihu, we began our vacation. We were in a particularly good mood when we landed. The last day of the Pincus Labs conference ended with an awards ceremony. Various awards were awarded among more than 90 sales representatives. The award everyone was fighting for was Territory of the Year. It gave not only prestige and honor, but also a cash bonus, $25,000. I've worked hard and achieved some great successes this year. When Arthur Goodfellow, CEO of Pincus Labs, stood at the podium and announced the winners of the various awards, I listened nervously until he said, "Michael Ballantyne for Ambassador of the Year." I couldn't believe I won. I stood up and my Pincus Lab colleagues applauded and celebrated my honor. I walked to the front of the room, stopping and shaking hands along the way as the room continued to applaud. I noticed one anomalous moment while I was walking. Sitting in front, not applauding, with an even more negative expression on her usually sour face, was Angela Ridley. I half expected her to trip me up and trip me. The drive to Poipu and Kaloa Landing took about 30 minutes, and at first we just enjoyed the sights, sounds, and smells of Kauai. I loved the jungle humidity of this island. We discussed various things we wanted to do. On our list were hiking Waimea Canyon, snorkeling at Tunnels Beach, kayaking the Wailua River, and a trip to Secret Beach. This was a surprise for Ollie. Our room was gorgeous, the hotel was wonderful, and although it rains a lot on Kauai, the weather in Poipu was perfect. Mid-80s, sunny, but with enough clouds to provide welcome shade. The first few days we hiked through the canyon, kayaked on the Wailua River, and did some snorkeling. I was hoping that tomorrow, Monday, we could try Secret Beach. I thought I'd suggest this at dinner. We decided to have dinner at the casual pool bar at Kaloa Landing. The pool here has been voted one of the best pools in America, and it was really good. We talked and relaxed over our second drink. When I asked Ollie what she wanted to do tomorrow, "I don't know," she replied. "Let's go to one of the beaches, like Shipwreck or Brenneke." "These places are great," I agreed, "but there's another beach behind Kappa that looks really nice." I told her, "It's called Secret Beach. Sounds great." Ollie nodded in agreement, relaxing in the sun and drinking. I looked at her face, glad that she agreed to my plan for Monday. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and I saw her smiling at someone behind me. "Hello," she said and stood up. I wondered who she might know here on Kauai until I looked up. I quickly realized it was Adrian Vasquez from Pincus here at Kaloa Landing. "Hey guys," he started. "I thought I'd meet you here," he told us. Sometimes when you see someone out of context, it takes a while to realize it. Adrian and Pincus Labs were in a completely different universe than Ollie and I vacationing on Kauai. "Here," Ollie said and took a nearby chair, "join us." Adrian hesitated for a moment, but Ollie insisted. I was still switching mentally. Of course, he's a nice guy, but it was our vacation. Our time together. I was a little annoyed by his appearance. "So you decided to stay in Hawaii," Ollie said, "and come to Kauai." Adrian said that after talking to us that evening at Duke's, he made one last attempt to get his girlfriend Kayla to join him. It appears this was not successful. He decided to stay. Through Marriott, he applied for his hotel loan at Kaloa Landing. "What were you doing?" he asked. Ollie told him about hiking and kayaking. "Tomorrow we are going to explore a new beach for us," said Ollie. "What was it called?" she asked me. "I'm not sure," I lied. "There are so many great beaches here." "Secret Beach," Ollie suddenly exclaimed. "I think you said so." "Well, I don't know," I started, trying to deflect the topic. "Shipwreck Beach is a great location right before the Grand Hyatt here in Poipu." The conversation soon veered back to talking about Pincus. Adrian seemed like a pleasant enough person. I asked Adrian how he liked working at Pincus. "It's a good job and all," he began, "but I want to make real money, big money," he told us. As I talked to him about salaries, bonuses, benefits, and pension contributions, he nodded politely, never arguing, but I could understand that these practical benefits did not particularly interest him. "What things do you mean?" Ollie asked him. He talked about several things, including one of his current clients that he had become close with. He didn't give specifics, but said his client, Dr. Vijay Gupta, was on the verge of something big. "This could change our lives," he told us, "and if everything works out as Vijay predicts, there will be a lot of money to be made, a lot." Ollie seemed interested, and we continued to talk vaguely about Gupta and his supposed fantastic new product. "Look, when the time comes, I'll be able to give you more information," he said, mostly addressing Ollie. "But I've already signed non-disclosure agreements with Dr. Gupta. I may have already said too much." Later, after Vasquez had left, Ollie continued to think about Dr. Gupta's great new discovery and all the money she could make. "I'm a little wary of these get-rich-quick schemes," I told Ollie. She was silent for a minute and then said, "I know, Michael, but sometimes you have to take risks." The next morning, talk of Dr. Gupta, new products, risk, and Adrian Vasquez was all but forgotten, at least for me. We were packed into our rental car and headed to Secret Beach. We picked up one of the Kauai travel books and Ollie read it as we drove east through the tunnel of trees. "Oh, I see," she said. "Now I know why you wanted to go to Secret Beach." I looked at her with a silent, questioning, innocent look on my face. "Don't make that face," she said. "You knew this was a nude beach." She accused me, but with a smile on her face. "Don't start fantasizing about me being naked on a public beach," she told me. "Well, maybe not completely naked," I told her. She continued reading, and I smiled and thought maybe I could persuade her to at least bare her breasts. The secret beach is not only beautiful, but also quite difficult to get to. You need to carefully follow the signs. The exit and parking spaces are not obvious. After parking, there is a difficult descent to finally get to the beach, but it is worth it. And this is where the lack of clothing became more obvious. We finally found a good place. It became obvious that the further west you went, the less clothes you wore. We were close to the ocean on fine white sand, but far enough from the high tide line that we didn't have to worry about a big wave. I took off my t-shirt and Ollie took off her cape. She was wearing a new, more revealing swimsuit that she bought at a store in Kaloa. "Your swimsuit looks great," I said to Ollie. She smiled as she continued reading her magazine. "You know, honey, most of the women around us are at least topless," I told Ollie, and noticed how she looked around at the other people. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe, but not right now. I'm just enjoying the beach, the ocean, and the sun." We sat like that in heaven. I was reading my book, completely disconnected from work, enjoying the sensual pleasures around us. Every now and then a lone man would walk along the beach, looking for a quick glance at a naked woman. You could tell from their zigzag route that they were looking for a quick voyeuristic thrill. They seemed harmless. A little later, Ollie lay down on a towel on her stomach. "Michael, can you put some sunscreen on my back? I don't want to get sunburned," she said, and tossed me some sunscreen. Finally, as I applied the cream to her shoulders, I pulled the swimsuit straps down until they gathered at her elbows. Basically, she was now topless. I tried to discreetly feel her. My hands went to her breasts. "Keep your hands to yourself," she warned, but with a smile, "or I'll put my top back on." I laughed and went back to my book. After perhaps 30 minutes, Ollie stood up and sat down in a chair. Topless, I couldn't stop watching. "Would you like some more sunscreen?" I asked, nodding at her bare breasts. "No, thank you," she smiled and said. "I'm afraid neither of us will be able to stop once you start. But I better apply the cream, these guys." And she grabbed both breasts and shook them slightly. "They are rarely in the sun." "Rarely?" I asked. "I didn't tell you all my stories before we met." She laughed and teased me. I thought. Someday I'd like to hear these stories. Meanwhile, I was enjoying watching her apply the cream to her breasts. We continued to enjoy the beach, and every now and then I would sneak glances at my topless wife. I wasn't the only one. As I said, lonely men sometimes walked along the beach, hoping to see a naked woman. Some were more obvious than others, but I noticed that none of the other campers were reacting, so I began to ignore them. The sun rose, it became hotter, and we decided to cool off in the ocean. I was really wondering if Ollie would wear the top again. She didn't put it on. We splashed around in the surf. The water temperature was warm, but not too warm to cool us down. After playing in the water, we started to head back to our chairs. Along the way, I tried to casually look behind my sunglasses at the other women in the distance, visible from our path. "Is it your friend?" Ollie asked me, surprising and interrupting my gaze. "Friend?" I asked, slightly embarrassed. "Mike, Ollie, I heard someone calling us from the beach." It was Adrian from Pincus, walking towards us smiling and waving. I quickly waved and turned to Ollie. "Do you want me to come up and take your top?" I asked. Ollie just laughed. "Michael, a dozen or more men have already looked at my breasts since we've been here," she told me with a small smile. "What difference does it make, one more?" "Yes," I began, but we know him," I said, stuttering, not quite understanding the logic of my statement. "Who cares?" she said. "He's almost here, and it'll be weird to suddenly have more clothes on again. I'll probably never see him again after I get home. Later I will regret that it was not so." Adrian stopped to talk, and yes, Ollie's breasts were in full view. I noticed him glance at her a few times, but who could blame him? She looked good. For her, it was something ordinary. She was not shy. After about 10 minutes of conversation, Adrian said he needed to get on his way, and we made vague plans to meet one evening before we left for home. With a strange feeling of jealousy and relief, I watched him leave. While I got some sort of enjoyment out of my wife being half naked around strangers, it kind of bothered me that someone I knew was seeing her breasts. Don't ask me to explain my logic, that's just what I thought. Well, that was a little weird, I stated, returning to our chairs. What? She asked, genuinely surprised. It's just that someone I know saw you topless, I explained. She was silent for a few moments, contemplating, I presume, my statement, or perhaps her own feelings on the matter. She didn't respond to my comment. A few hours later, we packed our things and started climbing back. Ollie was now dressed. The climb up the trail was much more difficult, and the sun was now high in the sky. The ride back to Kaloa Landing was comfortably calm after a fun day on the beautiful beach. About halfway back, Ollie made a remark. "He looks in good shape," she said suddenly, looking out the car window. "Who?" I asked, although I already guessed. "Your friend Adrian," she replied. "He has a good figure." Adrian was really in good shape. A little different from me, he was taller, slimmer, with minimal fat. He had visible abdominal muscles and looked like a middle-distance runner. I was also in good shape, but in a different way, as I said. I had more muscular, wider shoulders and hips. My abdominal muscles were also visible, but they were the result of many hours in the gym. Adrian looked like he was genetically gifted. He had the plasticity of a natural athlete. Despite the small flare of jealousy caused by her statement, it was extinguished by the atmosphere surrounding us. Tropical island, wonderful weather, beautiful hotel, and memories of my wife half naked on the beach. I haven't spent much time thinking about Adrian Vasquez. When we returned to the hotel, we showered together, washing off the salt and sand. I had been semi-horny all day watching Ollie partially naked, and now in the privacy of our room, she quickly became fully naked. We made love. Later, we watched the sunset while having dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a good day. We returned to the room, and I retired to the balcony with an afternoon rum, enjoying the view of the grounds and the magnificent pool. I was immersed in pleasant thoughts when I felt her hand on my shoulder. I didn't turn around right away. A moment later, Ollie stood in front of me at the railing, wearing almost nothing. She was wearing transparent white lingerie, almost naked. I haven't seen this outfit before. It was virtually transparent. "Ollie," I exclaimed, "you're almost naked." "I know," she replied. "What are you going to do about it?" "But there are people here, they will see," I stated. She simply turned her head, looked over her shoulder, shrugged, and smiled at me. I wondered what this woman had done to my previously demure wife. I didn't need many invitations. Her excitement was obvious. In the end, she stood up without saying a word, took off her transparent underwear, and walked completely naked into the room. I sat there enjoying the evening, happy that I had brought her pleasure. A few minutes later, I took my last sip, picked up her abandoned underwear, turned around, and closed the sheer curtains on the balcony. The weak light from the area partially illuminated our room. I dropped my shorts and made love to her. What a great way to end a wonderful day. All too soon, we were on a Hawaiian flight back to Portland and our normal, non-vacation lives. As we sat holding hands on the flight, Ollie made me promise to take her back to Hawaii at least once a year. My usual thriftiness was outweighed by the intimate excitement we experienced on this trip. I agreed that this would be an annual event. One more thing to note about vacation. We ended up having dinner with Adrian Vasquez on our penultimate night on Kauai. He texted me that day, and although I would have preferred not to, I agreed to dinner. I knew we might meet again, and I didn't want it to be awkward. It turned out to be a pleasant evening. Adrian was very charming with people and impressed us at dinner. I could understand why he became so successful in his sales role so quickly. When the conversation got too deep into Pincus, he turned the topic back to Allison. She seemed to appreciate Adrian's attention. From time to time, I would have mild outbursts of jealousy. Here I was watching this young, attractive, charismatic colleague focusing his attention and almost flirting with my beautiful wife, which, by the way, he saw half naked just a few days ago. Nothing Adrian did crossed the line into what was unacceptable, and if he was fat and bald, I wouldn't give it a second chance. but I knew my wife well enough to see that she was impressed by my charming colleague. "What an interesting young man, handsome and ambitious," she commented as we walked back from dinner with Adrian. "I wonder why he's not married. He'll make some woman happy one day," she added. I said nothing. Ali had never given me any reason to suspect any affection for another man, but for some reason, Vasquez's charisma seemed to impress my wife. Life returned to normal after returning from a Hawaiian vacation. Ali and I returned to our cozy three-bedroom, two-bath house located in a typical middle-class neighborhood. Our house was built in the 60s and was durable, but it was unlikely to ever win an award from Architectural Digest. Cozy but simple. I owned a house before we got married, and Allison moved in with me about 6 months before we got married. She worked as an independent interior designer and ran her own practice. It was hard to tell that she was working full-time, but she remained fairly busy. She used her design skills to greatly improve our home, and I have to say she was successful. Lately, however, she started hinting that it's time to renovate our home. Because of my innate frugality and aversion to financial risks, I did not support this idea. This led to discussions that almost turned into arguments. Nothing serious, just different opinions. Ollie's family was upper middle class. She was an only child and, as far as I can tell, was somewhat spoiled. She grew up in the Western Hills among expensive homes with manicured grounds and impressive views. Ollie's father died shortly before our wedding, and her mother sold the house several years ago when she moved into a nursing home. Over the next few months, several events occurred that impacted our life path. It's amazing how these seemingly insignificant events can change our lives so dramatically. The first event occurred 2 months after the Pincus Labs conference in Hawaii. It wasn't a big surprise, but it was worth noting. Adrian Vasquez has retired from Pincus Labs. I wasn't too shocked to hear this. He spoke of his desire for wealth, and although Pincus was a stable and fairly well-paid company, the financial goals he pursued were unlikely to be met at Pincus. I remembered mentioning this news to Ollie one night at dinner. "So he finally did it," she commented. "What do you mean, I finally made it?" I asked. "Well, when we were in Hawaii with him, he kept talking about taking big risks to get what he wants," she explained. I noticed how she looked into the distance with a half-smile on her face, shaking her head slightly, as if she was lost in deep thoughts. I knew she thought I was too conservative. This is how I was made. I grew up with no guarantee of 3 meals a day. We were often on the verge of poverty. I never wanted to be in that situation again. I could not accept the thought of great risks that could jeopardize our safety. Anyway, I continued, he had a great future at Pincus. I hope he knows what he's doing. He may regret this decision. I stated. "He won't regret it," Ollie answered quietly, still lost in her thoughts. 2 months later, Ollie's mother, Helen, fortunately passed away. Ollie, of course, was sad and cried for her mother, but we both knew that her dementia had created a shell of the woman who raised Ollie and with whom she had been so close all her life. In a way, it was a blessing. A few weeks after the funeral, we looked into Helen's and now Ollie's finances. The remaining balance in the brokerage account after all expenses was $388,900. Suddenly, our financial situation changed. It wasn't enough money to quit my job, but it took a lot of the financial pressure off. Of course, we had different opinions about what to do with the money. My strategy was to invest it in moderately aggressive mutual funds with a bond mix for stability. This would secure our future retirement and create a financial cushion for the future. Ollie talked about the new house, the BMW she wanted, and more holidays. These differences created new tensions in our home. We didn't argue about it every night, but when Ollie came home and talked about the new, bigger, better house she had seen, I dampened her enthusiasm with my practical objections. She said things like, "Let's put it in a pool." She always loved pools, and whenever we went on vacation like Hawaii, she wanted to make sure there was a nice pool. "Allison," I replied, "that's not practical." "Well, at least the jacuzzi," she insisted. I remained committed to saving for the long term. One day, I came home and saw a new red BMW convertible in the driveway. I soon learned that Ollie had made this purchase despite my advice. I tried to pretend I was excited about the new car, but I think she knew I was putting on an act. It was hard for me to be happy with such a $50 Susans and plus extravagance. As a compromise, I told her we could update the bathroom she used most often. With 2 bathrooms, we each had our own main space. She's been wanting to update it for years after watching all the remodels on HGTV. In fact, a $6,000 TV repair would most likely cost $20,000, according to my calculations. She was excited about the idea of a new bathroom, and within a few weeks of choosing the tiles, fittings, and cabinets, everything was back to normal. I spent most of Saturday taking apart the old shower. I fell behind my plan on Sunday fiddling with the water shutoff valves. I was finally able to remove the sink and toilet for Sunday dinner with minimal flooding. All I had to do was remove the flooring and baseboards, and I had to do it by Monday. It was already dark when I left the garage with the last pieces of baseboards and flooring to throw in the dumpster. Here, as I later realized, I made a minor mistake, which under normal circumstances would have had no consequences. I didn't realize the scale of the mistake at the time. I took one last look at the dismantled bathroom before showering in my bathroom and going to bed, tired, on Sunday night. The next event happened on Monday morning. I received a message asking me to come directly to the office, which I did not always do. I usually started my calls by driving to the farthest geographical point of the day and then driving back. The message was from my boss, Carl Rudinsky. When I arrived, I was told to go straight to Carl's office. I was surprised to see Don Clemens, the senior executive there, sitting in a chair off to the side. I quickly shook hands with both of them. "Mike, please sit down," Rudinsky said. I noticed that he had a big, friendly smile on his face. Whatever it was, I quickly realized it wasn't something bad. "Michael," Clemens began, "I want to get straight to the point. I have an offer for you. We have created a new position at Pincus. Before we begin the interview process, I would like to know your level of interest." Clemens explained that they want to create something of a hybrid sales manager and sales trainer. He continued to explain the reason. "We invest a lot of money in training people and preparing them for future roles at Pincus. When we lose someone prematurely, it not only leaves us without a person, but also forces us to start the training process all over again." Clemens said, "It's getting expensive." The new role will involve working with new salespeople to not only help them become successful, but also ensure that as much talent as possible is retained. No one talked about it, but I suspected that Adrian's departure had accelerated the strategy of creating a new position. I sat there thinking about the questions that were running through my head. How much travel? What will happen to my current clients? Is it office or field work? And of course, what will the salary be? "Michael," Clemens continued, "I'm sure you have questions. Here's the job description from the corporate office. Read it." "And Michael," Clemens added, handing me the folder, "if you would prefer to maintain your old territory and remain in your current position, no offense, we can consider other candidates. But you are our first choice." I sat there nodding and then stood up to get the job description folder from Don Clemens. As I reached for it, I saw a notepad on the table in front of Clemens with some words at the top and a list of names below. My name was first on the list with a check mark. I immediately saw the next name under mine, Angela Ridley. There's no way I'm letting her get promoted before me. Before I even picked up the folder, I blurted out, "I'll take this." "Great," Clemens said. "Congratulations, Mike," Carl announced, extending his hand to shake. "There's a lot of work to be done. We can set up your office today," Carl added. Throughout the morning, I studied and signed documents. The position seemed a little overwhelming, but I knew that with my organized, structured discipline, I would be as successful as I was in a sales job. I thought I had a lot to pass on to new sellers. I started to get excited about the new position. Carl, Don, and I had lunch together, and I left my phone in my new office. When I returned, I saw 3 messages, 3 calls, and a voicemail. all from Allison in the last 30 minutes. I called her back immediately. Michael, she began, sounding worried. There's something wrong with my car. What's happened? I asked. She said the car was acting strange, and a warning light came on the dashboard. She sounded a little shocked. Okay, I said calmly. Where are you now? She said she was able to park in a lot off Broadway in downtown Portland. Can you see the Roosevelt Hotel from where you stand? I asked. Downtown Portland is pretty safe during the day, but on the other hand, here's a beautiful woman in a flashy car. She could definitely be prey for a certain type of person who sometimes roams the streets of downtown Portland. I told her to lock the car, take her bag, phone, and any personal items and head to the hotel, and then have a drink or cup of coffee in the lobby. It will take me about an hour to get to you, I said. I have news too. I'll explain when I pick you up, I added. I declined dinner with Carl and Clemens, explaining that my wife had a minor emergency. When I arrived at the Roosevelt, luckily I found a convenient parking spot 1 block away and walked into the lobby of the bar. Allison was nowhere to be seen. I walked around the rest of the lobby, not worried, but rather curious. 10 minutes later, I called her. When she answered, I heard some noise in the background. "Ali, where are you?" I asked. "Michael," she spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. "I'm on the mezzanine, running into your friend Adrian, whom we met in Hawaii. He's giving a presentation. You should listen. It's really interesting." Okay, I thought. I was a little annoyed. I was excited to tell Ali the good news of my promotion, and now this. I found a room. There were about 20 people in the small conference room, mostly men and women in suits, but I noticed one strange man, not suitable for the place, wearing a dark beret. At the front of the room, behind the podium, stood Adrian Vasquez. He spoke with great enthusiasm about something called Novacom. Ali grabbed my hand and nodded towards Adrian Vasquez. "This is really interesting," she told me quietly. "This discovery could have a huge impact on our health," she added, squeezing my hand tighter. Silently, I watched Vasquez extol the virtues of Novacom's new product. He talked about Dr. Vijay Gupta and called him a biomedical genius. "In our preliminary tests," he said, showing a graph on his projector, "most common viruses become significantly less severe, and in some cases symptoms disappear almost immediately. Dr. Gupta and our staff still have a lot of work to do, but the results are so far extremely encouraging." As I continued to watch Vasquez, I couldn't help but be impressed by his presentation skills. He was smooth and convincing. I remembered him being in Pincus, and he was immediately identified as someone on the fast track to success. He was really good, but how true was what he said? "Okay, let's go," I whispered sternly to Ollie. Without making any attempt to leave or even acknowledging what I said, she looked at Vasquez. Now he was talking about the financial possibilities of investing in Novacom. I looked at the group of people. There were probably a few venture capitalists, a few rich friends, and maybe even an angel investor. "Ollie," I said a little louder. Okay, she said and slowly turned towards the door. I called AAA and we went to the parking lot where the car was parked. It turned out that it was a flat tire, but Ollie drove it so much that she damaged the disc. I asked a tow truck to take the car to the nearest Les Schwab tire center. We later found out that there was a nail in her tire, probably from the bathroom I was demonstrating. We walked past Roosevelt to my car. I was finally going to share the good news about my promotion. As we passed the main entrance of the hotel, Adrian appeared. "Michael," he greeted me with an unexpected man's hug. I quickly thought, did I know him that well? Vasquez was still in shape. He smiled, patted me on the back, and told me how nice it was to see me. "I was surprised to meet the charming Allison in the lobby," he said, smiling at us and nodding towards the hotel. "Can I treat you to dinner? It would be my pleasure," he asked, looking first at Ollie and then at me. "Adrian," I began, "maybe another time. It's been a long day," I explained. "Michael," Allison told me, clearly wanting to accept the invitation. "Not today," I firmly explained to both of them. Okay, I understand, but I would really like to see you both, and I think you might be interested in hearing about our work with Novusum. I insist on dinner soon, Vasquez said. I realized that Allison was disappointed that we didn't agree to have dinner with Adrian that night. She was quieter than usual as we drove home. Despite my mood, I told her about my promotion. She was happy and congratulated me, but without the degree of enthusiasm that I would normally expect. I didn't dwell on it. It had been a long day, and I didn't have the energy to deal with this minor problem. One of the first things I had to do in my new role at Pincus was hire someone to fill my old sales position. At this time, I was still running my old sales area and fulfilling my duties as sales manager. Over the next month or so, I worked long hours, and this seemed to affect our married life. Ollie said she understood, but the intimacy we usually shared seemed to be missing at times. It seemed to me that Ollie did not appreciate the need to sacrifice to achieve our long-term goals of financial security, a secure home for future children, and a comfortable retirement in the future. Meanwhile, I had 3 interviews scheduled for Tuesday at my old sales job. The HR department identified the most promising candidates, and I had meetings scheduled for the day. The first candidate was a woman, probably 28 or 30 years old, named Gail Beverly. She had a pleasant personality, was attractive in a business sense, and seemed like she really wanted the job. The problem was that she had very little experience. She was rated the lowest of the 3 candidates by HR. The next guy, Ron Gold, had a lot of experience. He worked for 2 other pharmaceutical companies and was older than me, probably about 45. He was rated the highest by the HR department. He talked a lot about his achievements, and by the end of the interview, I was tired of him. And I just met him. The last guy, Elliot Percy, had an advanced science degree and looked pretty good on paper. His problem was that he was so socially awkward that I felt uncomfortable around him. I sent my recommendation to HR, curious to see what their response would be. The following Thursday, I received an email. Human Resources has approved my recommended candidate, Gail Beverly. This news lifted my spirits. First of all, I think she will do a good job. Secondly, one of my first management decisions was confirmed. And finally, now that there was a potential candidate to take my place, there was light at the end of the tunnel regarding my workload. An hour later, still in a good mood from the email, I received a phone call. Adrian Vasquez. Michael, my friend, he began, I would like to remind you of the dinner invitation we discussed a while ago. When I receive an invitation to something I don't want to do, I have a mental Rolodex of excuses that I quickly flip through to come up with some excuse that rings true. Today, I think I was mentally focused on the hiring news and couldn't quickly come up with an excuse to avoid dinner. We agreed to meet on Saturday night at Del Toro in the Trendy Rose district. As soon as I hung up the phone, I immediately regretted accepting Adrian's invitation. Ollie and I arrived at Del Toro a little late. Parking in the Rose area was a problem. Adrian was waiting for us at the bar. When we walked in, Adrian immediately stood up smiling, walked over to us and hugged Allison, adding short kisses to each cheek. He grabbed my hand with both of his hands and then patted me firmly on the shoulder, making strong eye contact. Allison, Vasquez began, looking at her after the greeting. You become more and more beautiful every time I see you, he showered in compliments. His compliment was a little over the top, but he was right. Allison really looked especially attractive tonight. She spent extra time on makeup and wore a dress that I hadn't seen before. It was low cut, exposing the top of her breasts. I wondered if Vasquez was remembering seeing her naked at Secret Beach. Dinner was quite enjoyable. There is no doubt that Adrian was charming. He complimented me on my promotion, although I wasn't sure how he knew about it, but I was grateful for his words. He asked Allison about her interior design business, asking for some specific details. He asked some deep questions about the design and its accessibility. He then explained that he was in the process of buying a house. My condo is nice, but I found a place with some land west of Portland. He described a house and plot of land in the Sylvania area. He explained that the house was in good condition, but cosmetic renovations had not been done in more than 10 years. While he and Allison talked vaguely about how she could help him with interior design, I thought about the house. Ever since Allison started pressuring me to move, I've been keeping an eye on the real estate market. In fact, I was also interested in plots of land. One of the things I quickly realized is that any house with a plot of land fairly close to the center is expensive. I estimated that what Adrian was talking about would certainly cost more than $1.5 million, probably closer to $2 million. I wondered how he could afford this. The conversation switched again, and he started talking about Novosim. It was almost as if he was giving us a version of the speech he gave at Roosevelt. First discussing the promise of a potential cure for common viruses, and then talking about financial opportunities. Based on our current valuations, he continued, I have made a lot of people very rich. He told us proudly. Ali was fascinated, her eyes slightly glazed over as she listened to Vasquez. How much? She suddenly asked, referring to all the money she had earned. Vasquez laughed as he answered. Allison, he replied smoothly, why don't we just say a lot? Millions, she continued. Quietly, Vasquez nodded with a smug smile on his face. He then told us that he was going to be giving another investor presentation at the Willamette Club, a prestigious sports and social club, the following week and invited us to come. Allison nodded enthusiastically, and I quickly intervened. We'll see, I told Vasquez. The evening ended, and as we said goodbye in front of the restaurant, Vasquez gave Ollie the all-too-familiar hug and kiss again. This time, however, she seemed to respond more actively. We drove home in comfort, mostly in silence, but there was a slight sense of tension. I knew I wanted to warn Ollie about these get-rich-quick opportunities, but I wanted to do it in a way that didn't lead to an argument. At that moment, I still didn't know how it would sound. By Monday, I received an email from HR giving Gail Beverly the green light for the next stage of the interview process. These will be individual interviews with Dawn Clemens and my boss, Carl Rudinsky. She will be interviewed by Carl on Wednesday and with Dawn on Thursday. I called Gail to tell her about this. This is simply amazing, she said to me enthusiastically. Is there any advice you can give? She asked. I enjoyed the short phone conversation and felt confident that I had made the right candidate choice. Tuesday and Wednesday, I was in my old shopping area, and then Thursday afternoon, I was back at the office. I knew Gail was interviewing with Clemens at 3 o'clock. I received an email from Dawn Clemens unequivocally endorsing Gail Beverly for the position of sales representative. She was currently in the HR department, discussing the compensation package. I was told to meet Dawn, Carl, and our new employee Gail at 4:30 in Carl's office. Just as I was about to leave to meet them, Ali called. When are you going to come back home? She asked. I explained that I wasn't sure. We were in the process of hiring a new sales representative. Michael, we have to be there by 6 o'clock, Ali told me. Where? I asked, confused. At the Willamette Club. Adrian is waiting for us, she almost screamed. I explained that I would not be able to come, that we would go to one of these events another time. Michael, I'm dressed and I told Adrian we'll be there. Did you tell Adrian? Is she talking to him now? I'll have to ask her about that. Allison, I said firmly, I have a meeting. I can't possibly make it by 6. It doesn't matter, but now I have to go, and I'll see you later at home. I told her and hung up. It was everything I thought it would be. I congratulated Gail on accepting the job, and the 4 of us agreed to celebrate at the Farmer's Tavern, just down the street from the office. It was something of a tradition. I liked the way Gail interacted with management. She seemed respectful but not intimidated by Carl or Dawn. One thing I knew for sure was that her success or failure would reflect directly on me. I hired her. We had a great time getting to know Gail. Our conversation was mixed between pinkish and personal, cozy and relaxed. Gail asked about the schedule for the future. This would be a slightly longer conversation. Carl and Dawn knew this, and both stood up. Again, Clemens said to Gail, "Welcome to the team. Glad you're with us." After they left, Gail and I settled down to talk about her start date and what the schedule would look like for the first few weeks. By the time we finished, it was almost 8 o'clock. As I drove home, I was happy with a sense of accomplishment. I made my first hire, and it looks like it will be successful. I thought about Gail a little and started thinking about her appearance. I know that it is not entirely correct to think about a subordinate in this way, but what could I do? She is a woman, I am a man. Men think about women physically, that's nature. My first impression was that she was businesslike. Short hair, not much makeup, maybe a little boyish. But she also looked in good shape. I remembered her butt when we left. It was toned and muscular. She was built like an athlete. Different from Allison's feminine appeal. Lost in thought while driving, I suddenly noticed Ollie's red BMW pulling into the driveway directly in front of me from the opposite direction. Inside the house, I found Ollie in the kitchen preparing a light dinner. Her cheeks were flushed, and she was in an agitated, almost manic state. "Oh, Michael," she began, barely breathing. "It was so interesting. What they do is incredible, and the possibilities, it could change our lives." She continued. "Careful, slow down," I calmly told her. "What are we talking about?" "Michael, Adrian's company, Novisum. This product will change the world. This is our opportunity to get into the very first step." She continued, "Adrian makes people rich, don't you see? With the income he talks about, we could become rich." I began to understand. While I was with Gail and my management, she went to Vasquez's investor presentation. There were a few things about this that annoyed me. We've all heard about someone who invested in an early-stage company that went on to become very successful. They talk about their small investment turning into millions. For me, it was like a lottery. You have no control over this, and the chances of success are extremely low. Ollie and I agreed on most things, but I was pretty conservative financially. I believed in hard work, frugal living, and long-term planning to achieve your goals. She was different. She wanted the best things in life faster. Although I knew we would get a nicer house, more luxurious cars, and more frequent vacations over time, that would happen later in life. She and I disagreed on this. And now it seemed that she believed everything that Vasquez had so smoothly presented. I took a deep breath. "Ollie," I began, "they haven't sold anything yet. Their product isn't even approved. How can all these people get rich?" I asked. "Michael, this is an assessment," she told me enthusiastically. "Adrian told me that the shares he owns today are worth in the low 8 figures. He says that once everything is approved, that value could be 100 times what he currently owns." I sat down and thought about what I had heard. There may have been a solid basis of truth in much of what Vasquez said, but I was not wired that way. Ollie was hinting that we could actually invest. There was no way that would happen. I knew she had an inheritance, but I was pretty sure she wouldn't touch it without discussing it with me first. But there was something else. Why was he telling her his intimate financial details? My mind quickly went back to the hugs and kisses in the restaurant, her in the low-cut dress, and then further back to Secret Beach. He saw her almost naked with her firm breasts jutting out. I felt sparks of jealousy begin to flare up. We ended up sort of agreeing to disagree on the issue, but it caused tension in our house that night. While I was excited to tell her about my first hire, such news would have seemed tame compared to her forward-thinking thoughts on venture capital and valuations. "Ollie," I said as we got ready for bed, "I promise I'll go to one of Adrian's meetings," I conceded, "but please don't do anything without our discussion." In response, she gave me a good goodnight kiss, and I felt my tension levels go down. Later, I reflected that she never agreed to my request. Over the next few weeks, our lives seemed busy. Busy but normal. I've been busy with training Gail in my old shopping area and learning a new job. Ollie seemed to have several new clients. We both often worked until late in the evening, often every man for himself during dinner time. But on the weekends or the rare evening when we were both home, our relationship was good. It seemed like a good time in our marriage. After a particularly enjoyable weekend together, I received a call from Ollie on Monday afternoon. Adrian organized a meeting with investors on Wednesday night. She told me and gave me the details. How did you know about this? I asked. She explained that she was now on Novosim's email account. And besides, Adrian is my client for a new house. I talk to him several times a week. She told me. You never told me about this, I said, with a little tension in my voice. Yes, I did, she replied. I'm sure I did. It doesn't matter anyway. I just want to make sure we go to the presentation on Wednesday. I agreed to go. For several reasons. I was interested to hear the whole story about this supposed miracle drug, and I was curious about the smooth, handsome guy and my wife. On Wednesday night, we sat in the back of the hotel meeting room. There were several people in the foreground for a presentation. I recognized the strange, huge guy from the previous meeting. He was still wearing his beret. I also noticed an older black man with glasses sitting on one side of the lectern where Vasquez stood. Everyone, Vasquez began, good evening. Thank you for your presence. This will be an informative evening. Today we have the privilege of hearing from our founder, Dr. Vijay Gupta. He continued, Dr. Gupta will talk about our product, Novosim, the tests we have conducted, and the progress we have made in laboratory research. At that moment, Dr. Gupta stood up and walked to the lectern with several sheets of paper and began to speak. He didn't have Vasquez's charisma, but he clearly had a lot more substance. I had to listen carefully to understand what he was saying. He had a slight accent. I have to admit that what he said was interesting, but there were still a few steep obstacles. I also noticed that the most encouraging data he talked about was several years ago, and I wasn't sure of the veracity of everything he said. Finally, Dr. Gupta concluded his presentation, and it seemed that he had made his point to potential investors. And then Vasquez started. It was something like a show. Dr. Gupta provided technical information, and then Vasquez began aggressive selling. He talked about the current assessment. He talked about the future growth of the product once it is approved. He let us know that he has conditional purchase orders worth many millions of dollars from several national chain pharmacies, and then he laid out the possibilities. Novosim's valuation is growing rapidly. Those who invested, even early this year, have seen fantastic growth, he continued, his natural enthusiasm adding impetus to his presentation. I couldn't help but admit that at some point I too got carried away by the opportunity, and then my usual conservative feeling took over. It reminded me of a timeshare sale that Ollie and I attended early in our marriage. There was some kind of discounted travel package for a trip to Cabo and a stay at a beautiful resort for a few days. All we had to do was give them 90 minutes for their marketing presentation. The marketing presentation turned out to be old-fashioned high-pressure selling. I remember that at one point I even considered buying it until my better judgment intervened. I felt the same feeling sitting in this meeting room. At the end, Vasquez handed out brochures to the guests and then hurried to Ollie and me, smiling and still excited about his presentation. Michael, he exclaimed, shaking my hand and clapping me on the back. Eli, he greeted her and moved in for his hug. I noticed that their embrace seemed quite natural. In fact, too natural, as if they had done this many times before. My thoughts on this topic were interrupted by Vasquez. Michael, come here, he said, grabbing my hand and leading me back to the front of the room. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Vijay Gupta. I met Dr. Gupta, and he seemed like an intelligent, calm person. He was pleasant, certainly not like Vasquez with his smooth, enthusiastic personality, much more down to earth. On the way home, Ollie was quite excited about the opportunity with Novosim. I had other issues that I wanted to discuss with her. I couldn't just accuse her of something. I didn't have any facts, but I could have warned her about Vasquez's smoothness. Ollie, I began after a while, I understand the excitement of such opportunities, but we need to be careful. I have seen potential new products before in my field, but it is a long and risky path to success. A lot of people have lost a lot of money on these speculative new products. Moreover, I continued, we need to be careful with a man like Adrian. I know he has charisma and it's easy to fall for his charm, But there's a lot at stake, and we need to keep our eyes wide open, dealing with such people. What do you want to say? She asked me, with a hint of anxiety in her voice. Just be careful, we need to be careful, I explained and hoped she understood. My warning had a double message. Be wary of the get-rich-quick idea and be wary of the smooth, handsome young man who has actually already seen you almost naked. The rest of the car ride was quiet and quite comfortable, at least for me. I complied with my wife's wishes and sat with Vasquez that evening. I gave her my opinion and advice, avoiding an argument that might have flared up. In my mind, it was a mission accomplished. Ollie sat silently, looking out the side window for the rest of the ride home. The next few weeks passed uneventfully, but during this time our lives were a little lacking in intimacy. I couldn't pinpoint the reason. I knew I was busy with my new job and training Gail. The good news was that Gail was doing well. The clients seemed to like her, and I was getting good feedback. She and I drove around the area a few times, and she really started to like me as a person. Although I was completely ethical in my interactions with her, I couldn't help but notice her appearance. My initial impression of the boyish appearance has evolved. She was attractive, and what's more, she was in good shape. Athletic body, and what I could see of her legs and ass was muscular. I think she was trying to hide her larger breast size with her clothes. She was definitely attractive, but as her boss, it was strictly professional. One evening, Ollie and I found ourselves at home at dinner time, which was a rare situation these days. I suggested dinner at Leonetti, a casual cafe near our house. There wasn't that slight tension that I noticed. We were both relaxed and in a good mood. What projects are you working on these days? I asked. We were so busy that we didn't talk much about our work. She told me about a few things she was working on and then paused. But the main project is Adrian's new house in Sylvania, she exclaimed. This irritated me, but really, as far as I knew, there was no cause for concern. She had other male clients before. I remained silent. She talked about a big house on a lot in Sylvania. She told me it had been neglected all these years. She told me about the grounds, the beautiful pool, and outdoor entertaining area. Where is it? I asked, and she gave me a rough idea of the location of the house. I thought I knew the general area. We moved on to other topics, but the thought of the two of them in this big house outside the city bothered me. As I said, Ollie didn't give me any reason to doubt her, but the hug, the meeting on the beach, was what I was watching. I also saw such a charming guy as Vasquez. I knew this guy. We battled through another gray winter that continued well into spring in the Pacific Northwest. That day at work, I received good news. We were heading to Hawaii again for our annual sales conference. I remembered with vivid pleasure how fun our trip with Ollie to Kauai was after our last meeting. I planned to repeat this plan again and take a week off after the conference. That evening, I told Ollie about the sales conference in Hawaii, and she was just as excited as I was. We discussed where to stay, whether we should explore other islands, and what we would do. It was a great evening for both of us, our spirits lifted by thoughts of another trip to Hawaii. I planned to buy tickets as soon as possible to get the best price. By midweek, the weather began to change, and suddenly it was forecast to be around 80 degrees by the weekend. What a relief. I was able to get outside that weekend and do a lot of outdoor projects, things that didn't get done during the cold, wet winter. By Sunday evening, it became strange to think about. I would suddenly start to feel uncomfortably warm. The warm weather was going to stay for a while, and although I preferred it cold and wet, it was starting to get too warm. This week was my last week of teaching with Gail. She didn't really need more guidance from me, but I followed Pink's guidance. We had our last sales trip out west on Friday, and then she was on her way. She did great. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Ollie. Michael, Adrian has invited us to an afternoon pool party at his house in Sylvania this Friday, she told me. From 4 to 7, you'll love his place. It'll be a small gathering. It sounded fun, and if it had been anywhere other than Vasquez's house, I would have been more optimistic. I'll be at practice that day, I told her. I'm not sure how soon I'll get there. Okay, she said. I'll meet you there. I'll send you the address. We talked about it a little that night at home. I tried to remain in a good mood about this party, but my radar was tuned to everything related to Vasquez. All the hype about his miracle drug and the smooth way of presentation seemed false to me. The next day was the last day of training with Gail. We had to go to the coast. Her clients were scattered, so we left early to get a good start. I told Gail that I needed to be back earlier than usual because of an event at Vasquez's. It was a beautiful day, cooler along the coast, but still bright and sunny. Gail was well received by her clients, and I could see that she had begun the process of establishing good business relationships with clients. This was the key. We were ready by early afternoon. We had a quick lunch, and by my calculations, we should be back in town by 4 o'clock. It was a good day. I felt positive about how well Gail was doing, and I was looking forward to the weekend. About 10 miles into our drive home, we rounded a bend and saw a long line of brake lights from cars in front of us. There was some kind of traffic jam ahead. We stopped and sat there for a few minutes. I noticed that the oncoming traffic had also stopped. This meant that the entire highway was blocked in both directions. Not good. We sat there for a few more minutes and Gail opened the traffic app on her phone. Major collision at mile 17, she said, studying her phone screen. The sheriff is on the way, but no ambulance or tow truck yet. She took a deep breath. We could be stuck here for a long time. I thought about Vasquez's party and sent Ali a message. Traffic problem, I'll try to come as soon as possible. After another 10 minutes, I followed the example of some other cars. We turned around and decided to take the long way back. I estimate that we will now be back in Portland closer to 6 o'clock. My once relaxed mood became restless. The only positive thing was Gail. She tried to cheer me up. By the time we got back on 101, headed south, and then took the slow route home, it was almost 5 o'clock. There was no way I was going back to the office and then back to the party. I expressed these thoughts to Gail. Why don't we just stop by this party? It sounds like it's on our way, she suggested. If it's limited, I'll just wait in the car. I thought about it. It made sense. We were roughly heading towards Sylvania, and I was confident that I knew how to get to Vasquez's house. That's a good idea, I said and smiled for the first time since the traffic jam. And no, you won't wait in the car. We took the Sylvania exit and then after a mile or so turned left onto a narrow country road. After another half-mile, I saw a long driveway with brick pillars on each side and an open black wrought iron gate. We turned there. The house was one story with lots of glass, mahogany paneling, and a sloped roof. I could see what he was like before, and it seemed like Vasquez was planning to bring back his original charm. I saw Ollie's red BMW in the driveway, but only one other car. Did we miss the party? I looked at the clock, 6 o'clock and 4 minutes. I thought. Just a small group, I guess, Gail asked. Seems like it, I answered. We walked to the door and rang the bell. No activity. We stood there for a minute or two, and then Gail moved to the right. A minute later, she called me. Michael, she said, and then waved her hand in a come here gesture. I approached the gate. Looking through them, I saw the blue color of the pool and heard voices. I opened the gate and followed the stone path across the grass to the pool. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. There, sitting side by side on lounge chairs, were my wife Allison and Vasquez alone. They were the only ones at the party. I watched them talking and laughing together for that brief moment before they noticed Gail and I walking towards them. Michael, Vasquez shouted, jumping from his chair and rushing to greet us. As he approached, I noticed his clothes. He was wearing a bathing suit, standard pool party attire, I guess, but it was the kind of bathing suit that stood out, no pun intended. Not quite a Speedo, but not much bigger, and was very dense. Anatomically, there were few secrets in this style of swimwear. And as Gail and I got closer, I noticed Ollie's bathing suit. Not the super revealing bikini she wore for me in Hawaii, but almost. In fact, I don't think I've seen this particular swimsuit before, and I'm sure I will remember it. Various emotions flashed through my head. Curiosity about what's really going on. Anger at how it looked. Of course, jealousy, seeing my wife and Vasquez together both barely dressed. But the other strange feeling I felt was embarrassment. I was embarrassed that my coworker saw what I saw. As her boss, I had to control my emotions, be professional, and that may have been the only thing that kept me from blowing up. Allison stood up and put on some kind of cape. For a moment, I wondered who she felt the need to hide behind. Michael, Allison said, we thought you wouldn't make it. Wasn't there some kind of accident on the highway? She asked. Allison, Adrian, I began, ignoring her question about the accident. I'd like you to meet my employee, Gail Beverly. To say it was an awkward moment would be an understatement. But I have to say, Gail handled it politely and professionally. When Adrian, barely dressed, rushed towards her with his usual greeting, Gail extended her hand for a handshake, stopping his usual habit of greeting too closely. Allison at least had the decency to look embarrassed as we all stood there, in a state of near-total nudity in Vasquez's beautiful backyard. Our host went above and beyond, offering food, drinks, and a tour of the new home. I was unhappy with the situation, but since I was with my coworker, I needed to remain calm. Luckily, Gail came to the rescue. Sorry, Gail began. I have to go. You have a great place, Mr. Vasquez. Please call me Adri, he interrupted her. And it was nice meeting you both, she interrupted. Now, Michael, if you don't mind, we should probably go. And with that, we turned around and headed back to the gate we had just entered through. Michael, Ollie exclaimed, with a hint of pleading in her voice, a hint of guilt in her voice. I'll see you later, I shouted to her without turning around. When we turned the corner, Vasquez was still offering us chips and guacamole or something else, I thought. We headed to the car. As we drove away, I saw both Vasquez and Ollie at the gate watching us leave, him with a big smile, bright white teeth, waving goodbye. We didn't say anything for a few minutes as we headed back to the office. I was angry and embarrassed that Gail, my coworker, saw this. I was also becoming increasingly concerned about the nature of my wife's relationship with this guy. That was a little weird, Gail said, breaking the silence. I nodded in agreement. I heard about this guy. Didn't he work at Pincus? She asked. And doesn't he have some new miracle drug or something? I told her briefly about his history at Pincus and what I knew about Novusum and Dr. Gupta. I then told her that Ollie was working with Vasquez as the interior designer for his new home. Oh, I see, she said, nodding. That's the connection. We drove in silence until we almost reached the office. As we pulled into the parking lot, I turned to Gail. Hey, I started, do me a favor. Please don't mention anything about this. And then I gestured back toward Vasquez's house, to anyone. No, it's no one's business but yours, she said, and then stopped, turning to me. But I gotta say, I got a vibe from this guy. I've seen this guy before. I wouldn't trust him. She told me, getting out of the car. Driving home, I thought, yeah, I got a vibe from Vasquez too. The problem was that I was pretty sure Ollie wasn't getting the same vibe. Less than an hour after I got home, her bright red BMW pulled into the driveway. Allison burst into the house as if everything was normal. She came over to kiss me hello, and I retreated to do something in my office. She continued as if the party incident had never happened. Finally, I said something. So how was the party? I asked, curious what she would answer. She hesitated. It was kind of a failure, she finally said with a forced laugh. Several people got stuck in the same traffic jam because of the accident you were caught in, and in the end, it was just Adrian and I left. She said. Are you hungry? She asked, changing the subject. I ignored her question. I don't think I've seen this swimsuit before, I told her. She started some long story about a big sale somewhere and how she had to send it back and get a different size and how they gave it an even bigger discount and so on. Ollie, I said in a more serious tone, do you think there's something wrong with being dressed like that, alone with another man? Of course not, it was a pool party, she said, anger creeping into her response. Adrian is a friend, I trust him. What do you mean? Things went downhill very quickly. She accused me of not trusting her. I told her that it was Vasquez who should not be trusted by any of us. I knew I had to retreat to de-escalate the situation, but I was angry. Do you realize how embarrassed you made me in front of my coworker? I asked. Confused you. Her voice is now several octaves higher than usual. Am I embarrassing you? She was getting louder. I don't question you spending the entire day with this hot new girl. Hot new girl. I thought for a moment. Then I focused on our conversation. Okay, it was a full-blown argument by this point. It didn't end well. My point was that I thought she was acting inappropriately, at least dressed inappropriately, alone with a guy I didn't trust. She continued to claim that he was a good friend and that he was also her client. Neither of us gave in. There was tension in our house throughout the weekend, despite the warm weather. We didn't bring it up again. I think it was kind of an agreement to disagree. The problem was that it was never really addressed, and it was partly my fault. I knew that if I brought up the issue again, it would probably lead to another explosion. As things melted down in our house over the next few days, I never had the calm discussion we needed to have to resolve our differences. Life just went on, I was busy at work, and the topic of Vasquez didn't come up again. None of us. I made the mistake of thinking that because we didn't talk about him, our lives were separate from him. A mistake on my part. As I said, the hustle and bustle of normal life masked the cracks in our relationship. I worked hard in my new management role. I had almost put Adrian Vasquez out of my thoughts until one night before dinner. I got home from work and was half watching one of the evening news programs, sorting through my day. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from the TV. It was Adrian Vasquez. He was being interviewed by someone during the financial segment of a news program. He was talking about his new miracle drug, Novasum. He talked about the positive trial results they had received and how Novasum could change the lives of many people. I've heard all this before, but it was at a local meeting. This program was on national news. I looked at him, charming in his dark suit, with his hair slicked back and his teeth dazzlingly white. This guy was good. He answered the host's questions flawlessly, with smooth, ready answers. He was so convincing that I briefly wondered if I should invest in his company. Reason prevailed, and I quickly rejected the idea. As I stood up to turn off the TV, I noticed Ollie moving away from the doorway of my office. She also watched Vasquez on TV. Despite the slight lack of intimacy I noticed, we were both looking forward to our trip to Hawaii. It had been a little over a month, and we had been talking about it over dinner, and our shared excitement, I suppose, had helped us bond in the weeks leading up to the holiday. The Pincus Labs sales conference took up the first 4 days, and then our plan was to vacation, again on Kauai, for the week after. Last year, she and I flew to Honolulu together, and while I was at the Pincus meetings, she was relaxing by the wonderful pool. I assumed she would do it this year too. No, she said when I checked with her. I decided to fly in on Thursday. I'm busy at work, and besides, you'll be busy with all your meetings. She told me. Well, that was strange. She usually didn't like being alone at home. Moreover, she had her own business with great flexibility. Why would she stay in rainy Portland when she could be in a luxury Hawaiian hotel at the company's expense? I asked her several times about travel dates. But she was insistent that she would fly to Honolulu on Thursday, and then we would go to Kauai on Friday afternoon. Okay, I thought, I won't insist any longer. The first few days at the meeting were a little different for me. I was now in a management position, so my role changed at the corporate meeting. I soon discovered that some territorial representatives were looking for me, trying to impress, just as I had done in previous years. This time I was the boss. At first it was flattering, but quickly became boring. I spent more time with Gail than with anyone. I enjoyed her company, and she seemed genuinely attracted to me, and not just sucking up to me because I was the boss. I also knew that I needed to be careful. If I were seen spending too much time with a particular employee of the opposite sex, That would not be a good thing, especially with someone as attractive as Gail. It's strange, but several times during the week I had difficulty getting through to Allison. Our Pincus meetings ended in the late afternoon, and there was some free time before group dinners. I usually called Ollie around 5 p.m., which was 8 p.m. Pacific time, the hour I expected her to be available. I called her on both Tuesday and Wednesday evenings. No answer. Finally, on Thursday, I received a text message. At the airport, flight arrives at 1 p.m. Shuttle should get me to hotel by 3 Zoxo. Okay, I thought, no explanation, but it seems like she can't wait to come. Ollie and I had dinner Thursday night, and we were both in good spirits being here in Hawaii. The meeting ended on Friday morning, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon we were on Kauai. Being on another island away from all the Pincus people, remembering the best moments of our previous trip, it was like being wrapped in a magical, tropical blanket of sensory delight. We did all the fun things we did last year. And yes, that included a visit to Secret Beach. When Ollie took off her top on the beach, I noticed that her breasts had a slight tan. I asked her about this. "Oh yeah, I don't want my breasts to get burned," she said. "I went to the tanning salon this time to prepare for this trip. I assumed that we would visit this beach at some point," she said with a smile. Perfectly reasonable, I thought. The trip was wonderful, and the intimacy I felt was missing seemed to be reawakened on Kauai. Some of the shadow doubts I had been brooding over the last few months seemed to evaporate. Relationships have ups and downs, I thought. That's normal. With a slight sunburn and renewed optimism about our relationship, we boarded the plane and returned to reality at the end of the week. I was so inspired by the trip that while sitting in the Honolulu airport waiting for a flight to Portland, I booked a trip for next year. Joyfully, I told Ollie about the plan for the next year. The tropical weather seemed to follow us to Oregon, and we had a pleasant few days after returning. The positive energy gained from the holiday fueled our relationship, at least for a while. However, it wasn't long before the day-to-day worries of real life began to creep in, and perhaps we both focused on careers and affairs, hoping that our love lives could continue on autopilot. I traveled with my sales representatives while Ollie worked her usual irregular schedule as an interior designer. This schedule often included nights and sometimes weekends. At the beginning of our relationship, I asked her in detail about her work, and she explained it to me. I guess I just wasn't that interested. It was more important to me that she was happy with her profession. Perhaps that's why I didn't ask questions about all these increased irregular hours. It must have been 2 or 3 months after our trip to Kauai when I first saw the mysterious letter. I came home early in the evening and Ollie was not home yet. I took the mail and sorted the spam from the bills. The second letter from the end made me stop. It was addressed. Allison St. Clair Novusum. HM. I thought, why does she receive a letter with the name Novusum in the address? I held the envelope up to the light, but saw nothing. It didn't seem like a mass mailing, too targeted. An hour later, Allison walked in. The envelope lay face up on the kitchen island in front of me. I watched her. "Hi, Michael," she began as usual. "How was your day?" She saw the envelope. She froze. She quickly grabbed the letter. "What is it?" I asked in a neutral tone, nodding towards the mail, rather curious. "What?" she asked, delaying time. "A letter about Novusum," I answered, still in an even voice. "Oh," she began slowly, "it's probably just a mass mailing. They probably got my address from the seminar we went to." Logical, I think. I just didn't remember us providing any of our contact information at the meeting we attended. "So have you seen Adrian lately?" I asked. "We haven't really talked about him since that party." "Adrian," she began, not quite meeting my gaze, "only when I'm working on his project. He's away a lot of the time." I kept hearing little rumors about a new miracle drug that Vasquez was promoting. I knew that Novusum was preparing for an IPO, and from what I heard, they had not yet received approval from the FDA. Still, the promise of the drug seemed to attract more investors. "Okay, are you sure there's something we shouldn't discuss?" I asked, watching her. "Michael, there's nothing to discuss," she exclaimed, acting distracted as she scanned the rest of her mail. I simply nodded, believing her for a moment, but I felt my antenna rise a little higher. Normal life continued for both of us. I felt that I was doing a good job in my management role and received positive feedback from my boss and Don Clemens. Ollie was busy and seemed in a good mood. And then there's Gail. I was so proud of her, she showed excellent results. In fact, it was the second best seller in my area after being in business for just over a year. My only concern was that if she wanted a promotion, she would probably have to move. I wanted the best for her, but selfishly, I didn't want to lose her. This positivity continued until one night I came home first, and there was no mail again. This time, it was an official 9x12 envelope with several pages inside, addressed to Allison St. Clair, Corporate Secretary Novusum, and our address. What the hell is going on? What is she hiding from me? I was alarmed and a little worried. I wondered what she could have gotten herself into. I decided to hide the envelope and ask a few questions. Eventually, Ollie came home and everything seemed normal. I was sorry, but I decided to set a trap. Today, I saw another article about Adrian and Novusum. I told Ollie. Lie. Is it true? That's all she said. The company seems to be doing well, although I understand they haven't received FDA approval yet, I added. No, but it should happen soon, she replied. At this moment, I just looked at her without saying a word. I mean, that's what I could hear from Adrian, she quickly added. So you're involved in the Novusum business? I asked, trying to sound innocent. Michael, what do you mean? She said, sounding defensive. Well, I began, it sounds like you have some knowledge of Adrian's business. Maybe eavesdropping while you're working on his house. Something like that. I said it again innocently. I tried to give her a way out so she wouldn't lie to me outright. It didn't work. Michael, she said, stealing her tone, when I'm at Adrian's, I'm focused on my design, meeting the client's needs. I don't interfere in their personal affairs. I nodded silently. I remembered a YouTube video where a random fisherman is standing at the edge of the water, and suddenly the fishing rod suddenly bends in half, and suddenly the fisherman realizes that he has caught something huge. That's how I felt. She fell into my trap, and I knew she was probably lying to me. I dropped a large envelope addressed to her on the counter. Then what is it? I asked. I watched as Ollie's expression changed from curiosity to concern. Silently, she looked at me, then back at the envelope. Finally, she took a deep breath. Michael, please let me explain. She stared at me, searching for some kind of sign. I looked at her blankly. I spent a lot of time with Adrian working on his project, she began. He's very excited about Novusum. He says Dr. Gupta is a genius. He's cracked some kind of biological code. It's too complicated for me to understand. It's going to change the lives of millions of people. She looked at me, still searching for some sign of approval. My expression remained blank. And the medical benefit, she continued, that's only part of the story. There's a lot of money to be made. A lot. Michael, the latest estimate is that Adrian is worth almost $50 million. And now my estimate is over $1 million. What? I interrupted her. Did you invest money in this? Yes, I did, she answered defiantly. It was mostly my money from my mom's inheritance. I hardly used our money and took a small amount from my savings and inheritance. Mom left it for me, and I can do whatever I want with it. This started a new level of controversy. She stubbornly clung to the idea that the money was left to her, and it was her decision what to do with it. My point was that as a married couple, we should discuss such important decisions. At some point, I implied that she was being dishonest with me. She maintained that she never lied about anything. The whole nature of the dispute has moved into unknown territory. Just because you're slow and careful doesn't mean everyone else has to live the same way, she told me. Adrian quit his job at Pincus to do something bigger, better, more exciting, and he's doing it. When Novusum goes public, Adrian will be worth a fortune, and I will become a multimillionaire too, she said, crossing her arms and looking at me. I looked at her. Now we were truly in uncharted territory. The depth of the dispute was on a completely different level. In my opinion, she personally attacked me. She spoke disparagingly about my philosophy of life. The calm that I tried to maintain was shaken. Then why the hell don't you go to hell and live the way you want with Adrian? It was as if I had hit her. The expression on her face was one of shock. She looked at me as if trying to interpret my words, but there was only one interpretation. Suddenly, angry, she stood up, grabbed her car keys, her phone, and a few other things, and headed towards the door. In our marriage, when there were some minor arguments, I usually extended an olive branch for reconciliation. I think she was waiting for me to take some step towards reconciliation. I didn't do this. I heard her speed up as she pulled out of the driveway. She didn't take a suitcase or anything, so I expected her to come back later. I noticed that she took the envelope. I was excited and wanted to call her several times, but stopped. This time she should have apologized to me. She called me slow and careful. This translated to boring, and then I thought about Vasquez. Smooth, compelling, risky. Then my mind started going down a different path regarding Vasquez and Ali, an elegant, handsome, rich guy and a sexy woman who seemed to like that kind of thing. I started to wonder. I remembered her topless on the beach on Kauai when we ran into Vasquez. I remembered how he looked at her. Who can blame him? And then recently at the so-called party when it was just the two of them. She is in a skimpy bikini and he is in a tight swimsuit. It's one thing to betray me by investing money behind my back. A completely different level if something sexual happened. I plan to ask her about it when she returned tonight. The problem is that she never returned. I woke up the next morning after a restless sleep, checked her phone for messages, and looked down the driveway to see if her BMW was there. Nothing. Despite all the strife, I knew I had a job to do, and the people at Pincus were counting on me. Good old Michael, I thought, reliable and dependable. Throughout the day, I debated whether to call Ali, but every time I got close, my resolve grew stronger. She betrayed me by not telling me how close she was to Vasquez. She betrayed me by investing money in his business without my knowledge. And the way my mind worked, perhaps she had betrayed our marital vows by being intimate with Vasquez. I could handle some lying, but if it got sexual, that's a different game. A wave of sadness washed over me, and I was on the verge of tears. At that moment, my phone vibrated. I suppressed my emotions and hopefully reached for the phone. It was Gail. She had pretty standard questions that we usually talked about. After a few minutes of talking, she stopped. "Michael," she began, "are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, surprised. "Well, you sound different," she said. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked again. I sighed. "Just a few problems at home, nothing serious," I said, trying to give my voice a cheerful tone. "Let me know if I can help," she replied, her voice sounding skeptical, not quite believing my carelessness. Later that day, although I was pretty good at digging into my work, another thought stuck in my mind. What was written on that envelope? Something about the corporate secretary noviceum. I wondered what this meant. I Googled corporate secretary. I've read several definitions. It looks like there could be a few different responsibilities, and it also looks like she might actually be a corporate officer, depending on the structure of the corporation. On the way home, I tried to remain calm and organize my thoughts, preparing to speak to Ali with a rational approach to information gathering. Until it became a sexual relationship, I believed that we could solve our problems. Unfortunately, again, Ali was not at home, but there were signs that she was here. I noticed that the bathroom was missing some items, and its cabinets looked less stocked. Okay, the stakes have been raised. I decided to call her. Yes, I gave in, I knew it. But I needed to understand what was happening to my marriage. My call went to voicemail. Only the sound of her voice was bittersweet. I wrote her a message. "Allison, please contact me. We have a lot to discuss." I tried to be patient, but despite checking my phone every 10 minutes, there was no word from Ali. I really started to worry. My mind went into dark tunnels, imagining Allison and Vasquez in various sexual positions. Finally, I told myself that this was unhealthy. It was another restless night. I got up early, still not receiving any message from Ollie. I wrote to her again. It wasn't the most productive day at work, but I managed to forget about my personal problems for a while. By 5:30 p.m., I still had not received any communication from Allison. I got into the car, getting ready to drive home, and wondered where she might be. With her mother's death, she had no close relatives nearby. Although she had a wide group of friends, I couldn't think of a best friend she could stay with. And then I had another thought. Could this be possible? It seemed unlikely at the moment, but the more I thought about it, the more I needed to know. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed west, to Vasquez's house in Sylvania. I drove along semi-rural roads until I saw brick pillars on either side of a long driveway. I slowed down and started to turn, and then I saw the large black gate closed. I got out of the car and saw her red BMW through the gate bars. Suddenly, I was furious. I tried to open the gate, but it was securely closed. I called her. Nothing. I stood there, powerless to do anything. I was looking at a luxurious house, no visible activity. For a moment, I thought about ramming the gate with my car, but then I realized that I would probably get arrested and crash my car. Defeated, I went home. While her car there certainly wasn't a good sign, it was possible, just possible, that she was there professionally. With faint optimism, I hoped that this would be the case. Then I had a thought. If her car is there in the morning, I'll know she spent the night there. Unfortunately, tomorrow I had my weekly management meeting at 7 in the morning. I put the plan aside for a moment, and then suddenly an idea. I called Gail. "Hey," I said, trying to sound cheerful, "are you going to the coast tomorrow?" I asked. When I managed the territory, I set up my schedule so that my clients knew what day I was going to see them. Thursdays were always coast days. "Yes," she replied. "What happened?" "I need a favor." I said, "A big favor. This is personal, and I have to rely on you to keep this between us." "Michael?" She sounded a little alarmed. "What's going on?" I explained. I told her briefly about Vasquez. I told her about Ollie's investment in Novosim without my knowledge. And then I told her about our big argument and how I saw her car at his house. "So I'd like you to take a little detour on your way to the coast, drive past his driveway, and just see if her car is parked there. Take a photo if possible." Long silence. "Gail," I said, "I hope you don't think I'm asking this of you as your leader. I'm asking you as a friend. And if you don't want it, no problem, I'll just—" "Of course I'll do it for you, Michael," she interrupted. "Send me the address." I knew it was a risk to involve my employee, but I trusted Gail. The next day, somehow I was able to concentrate on the management meeting. By 9 in the morning, I was back in my office. 15 minutes later, I received a text photo from Gail. In the photo, I could see that the gate to Vasquez's house was still closed, and through the bars I could see the unchanging bright red color of Ollie's car. She was there all night. Suddenly, all my sadness was replaced by anger. I was pretty sure our marriage was over, but I was obliged to at least provide some kind of explanation. I wrote Ollie a message. "I know you're with Adrian. We need to talk. I'll be there at 6 in the evening." There were no replies from Ollie during the day. I must have checked my phone 50 times. But as the day wore on, my resolve grew stronger. If she has some plausible explanation for why she spent the night with Vasquez, and it should be very plausible, then we can begin the process of rebuilding and trusting. If I sense any kind of relationship between them, it's definitely the end. I even began the process of finding a divorce lawyer, which even a few days ago would have seemed ridiculous. These were my thoughts as I drove west to Vasquez's luxurious home in Sylvania. As soon as I turned off Highway 26, I had a thought. What if the gate is closed? I wasn't sure what I would do then, but I promised myself that I wouldn't scream or beg. I didn't mean to make a spectacle of myself. And then I turned and saw brick pillars. The gates were open. A sudden nervousness rushed through me, but was quickly replaced by other emotions, anger and curiosity. I had a few thoughts as I drove closer to the luxurious home and grounds. This was the type of house that Ollie liked. She would point out this style whenever we drove past something like it, or if she saw something like it in a magazine, she would show it to me. An attractive, sophisticated man, wealth, and the house of her dreams. Can I compete with this, I wondered? Can our love and relationships overcome these attractions? I'll find out soon, I thought, noticing a red BMW parked at the entrance. Just as I was about to knock, the door swung open, and there, in all his glory, stood Adrian Vasquez. "Michael, please come in," he said, spreading his arms as if he wanted to hug me. I walked past him in silence. "Michael," he turned to me again, "I'm really sorry about the problems that have arisen between you and Allison. You're both good friends, and I hope we can all find a solution that works for everyone." He proclaimed. "Where is she?" I asked neutrally. Yes, he began. "Allison is freshening up. She will be out soon. In the meantime, as host, I must offer you drinks. What would you like, my friend? A drink, a glass of wine? Anything, my friend." He really tried. "What I want," I began with a hint of anger in my voice, "is to have a serious conversation with the woman who is now my wife, and I want to do it in private, without you being present. Of course, my friend, you and your wife have a lot to discuss. I completely understand. I will not interfere in your conversation." At that moment, Allison came out of the corridor. With her arms folded across her chest, she looked like she had just stepped out of the shower, her hair still damp. She didn't quite meet my eyes when she walked into the living room. "Hi, Michael," she said, glancing at me briefly. Vasquez made no move to leave and leave us alone. "Get out," I barked at Vasquez. Yes, of course. You need privacy," he said, hastily leaving. Allison sat in one chair, and I stood in Vasquez's living room. The view from the back window showed a beautiful blue swimming pool and manicured gardens. I saw chaise lounges and a table between them with half-full glasses still on the table. I looked at Ollie, and she was looking in the other direction, not meeting my eyes. "So what's up?" I asked. She sat there silently, hands clasped, not looking at me, with a blank expression on her face. "And why, of all places, did you come to this guy's house?" I asked, my anger seeping into my words. After a moment, she answered, "After you kicked me out, I called Adrian. He said I could stay here while I figured it out." She said quietly. "Are you so close that he's the first person you call?" I asked. More anger. "Adrian has become a good friend," she said with more confidence. "He and I share many of the same thoughts and values. He understands me," she added. "Are you saying," I asked, raising my voice, "that I don't understand you after all this time?" "Michael," she said, now turning to me for the first time, "I love you, but we are separated." She took a deep breath. "I think what I want in life and what you want have become two different things." Suddenly, I realized that our marriage was in a much more fragile state than I thought. At that moment, I realized that I didn't want this. "Allison," I began in a soft voice, "tell me what it is you want that is so different from what we have," I asked. "Michael," she began with a definite expression on her face, "you are a reliable, honest, stable, practical person. These are qualities that I have always appreciated in you, but I think I have changed. I want more," she said. "More than what?" I asked, getting angry again. "This," she said, waving her arms around the house and grounds. "That's the lifestyle I want. A nice house, travel, trips, nicer things, a different lifestyle. I want excitement." I stood looking at her, realizing that I probably never knew her as well as I thought. Her words rang in my ears. My interpretation was that she was bored with me, my stable job, our practical home. Finally, my brain got the message, or at least my interpretation of the message. "So you're sleeping with this guy?" I asked, nodding in the direction where Vasquez had gone. After a short pause, she answered. "What kind of question is this?" she answered, trying to add a hint of indignation to her voice. "Adrian is a friend." "So you are?" I asked again. And then I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Vasquez, who must have been hiding somewhere nearby, re-entered the room. "Michael," he began, "the truth is that the friendship between Allison and I has blossomed in recent weeks. But you, Michael, are my friend too. I think the three of us, all of us mature and reasonable people, can discuss our differences," he said, showing off his charm and confidence. At this moment, I was paralyzed with anger. "Discuss our differences," Vasquez continued. "I have an idea. With Novasum, we are entering a third round of financing. This time, the valuation will be at 200 million. When Allison invested, the valuation was 50 million. Her shares are now worth almost $2 million. The same sales tactics I had seen in meetings with venture capitalists began to emerge. Silently, I was angry, but also curious about how we had moved from my marriage to his company. "Michael, as a sign of our friendship, I can offer you a second valuation of the round. You will immediately quadruple your money," he exclaimed, smiling and waiting for my confirmation. When my silence remained unanswered, he felt the need to fill the pause. "Personally, my shares are worth over $30 million, and when the IPO launches later this year, all of our shares will at least double again," he explained. I noticed a small smile on Ollie's face as she looked at Vasquez. Mentally, she was counting her own wealth. "Let me get this straight," I asked. Vasquez's head nodded in confirmation, a big expectant smile on his face. "If I invest $100,000, it will immediately become, say, 400,000, am I correct?" I asked. "Yes, yes," he nodded eagerly, as if the slow student in the class had finally understood the lecture. "And then, when the IPO goes live, I'll be worth 800,000, I asked. "Exactly," Vasquez exclaimed, literally clapping his hands. I now turned to Allison, speaking to Vasquez. "I'm a little slow, but let me repeat it all," I said calmly. "If I give you $100,000, I'll end up getting 800,000 back, but in the meantime, you'll be sleeping with my wife. Is that right? Did you understand the assessment correctly?" I asked. "Michael," Ollie reacted. At this point, I started to leave. Now I knew what was happening. As I turned to leave, my anger subsiding slightly, Vasquez grabbed my arm. "Well, Michael," he began. I had no idea, I barely remember it, but at that moment I turned around and punched him in the jaw with rage. It knocked him off his feet. Allison screamed and quickly ran towards Vasquez, yelling at me, asking why I hit him. I continued walking towards the door. "Mike," Vasquez said, now leaning on one elbow, still on the floor, "I'll let it go, just this once. However, next time you won't get off so easily." The confident good nature of the seller has disappeared. The dark, true personality came from him. With one last look at Allison, I left. On the way home, I thought about this whole meeting. She never admitted to sleeping with this guy, I thought. But having received the opportunity, she did not deny it. I couldn't help but remember that meeting at Secret Beach. Was that really the trigger for all of this? Then, sadly, I thought about my future, and on the way home that night, I finally broke down. I had to pull over to the side of the road as I grieved over my now inevitably failed marriage. After a few minutes of emotion, I took a deep breath and told myself to pull myself together and start making a plan. Step 1. Find a lawyer. When I first looked at divorce lawyers this afternoon, it seemed like it was a long shot that I would actually need one. Now I knew that this was no longer a long way. I arrived home and the house suddenly looked different. It was as if the things I thought belonged to Ollie looked strange, out of place. The burden of my failed marriage felt like a weight on my shoulders, dragging me down both physically and mentally. Fatigue overwhelmed me. I analyzed over and over again what I did wrong to get to this point. Knowing that she was sexually intimate with Vasquez, was there a situation in which I would forgive her? I searched long and hard for the answer to this question. In the end, I concluded that I could never forgive the betrayal. It was a long, painful night of confused thoughts, sadness, and anger. The next day, I called the office and took a sick leave. I received several phone calls throughout the day, including one from Gail. I wallowed in self-pity until the early evening. Finally, I told myself to stop whining and accept the fact that my marriage was over. I need to continue to make a plan for what to do next. I started taking notes. I made a few calls and set up an appointment for the following week with a divorce lawyer. I went through my emails for the day on Friday evening and finally listened to the voicemail from Gail. "Hey, Michael, it's Gail. Nothing urgent, just wanted to see how you were doing." And that is all. Obviously, she knew something was going on in my marriage. She was the one who gave me the information that Ali had Vasquez's car for the night. I appreciated her concern, but I also had to maintain our professional relationship. I didn't call her back. On Saturday morning, I found my long, unused running shoes and went for a run. It was actually a slow run with sections of walking, but it was a start. I decided to dedicate myself to a healthy lifestyle again. I spent the rest of the weekend working in the garden, and despite sad thoughts about Allison and our plans for the house slowing me down from time to time, I stuck it out. I was achieving something. I felt a little better. All weekend, I waited for some message from Ali. There was nothing. In the following weeks, I separated my personal problems and continued to work hard at Pincus Labs. I noticed that in the evenings at home, my house was lonely. I usually worked until 7 in the evening or so. One of the positive aspects of this whole situation was our business. My region had the highest sales growth in North America. I even received a complimentary call from Helen Fletcher, Vice President of Sales for North America. "Michael," Helen Fletcher began, "your team is doing an outstanding job. You exceeded the forecast by almost 20%. I thanked her and praised my group. "I would like you to speak at a sales conference. I know the event is still a few months away, but we are already planning the format. I think your success story could motivate others." I agreed, excited by the attention from the vice president. Despite the negativity of my failed marriage, my professional success kept my spirits up. My mood was lowered by a call from my divorce lawyer, Leland Wells. "Son," he began, Leland was in the later stages of his career. "I heard from your wife's lawyer. Her name is Tina Battellini, and she's tough. She's going to demand a lot. The first thing is that your wife wants her things that are still left in the matrimonial home." He continued that they are demanding access this week. I explained that she had a key, the locks had not been changed, and she could come at any time. I said I wanted to be there to observe and make sure my things weren't mixed up with hers. It was finally decided that she would come the following Wednesday afternoon. I told Leland I would make it happen. I wondered what kind of interaction there would be between us when she came to get her things. Since I encountered her at Vasquez's, I have not seen or heard from her directly. More than once I wanted to go there and see if her car was parked there, but I refrained. Finally, on Wednesday, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to our house, followed by a U-Haul truck. 2 Hispanic men got out of the truck, then Allison and another woman got out of the SUV. Allison was dressed fabulously in designer clothes and expensive sunglasses. Her expression was blank, her eyes hidden by dark glasses. I felt that this interaction would not be good-natured. The other woman was petite with masses of black curly hair. Her expression was serious and confrontational. She approached me aggressively. "Mr. Ballantyne," she began, Ali a few steps behind. "I am Tina Battellini, Miss St. Clair's lawyer." She gave me the shortest handshake. She presented me with a list of Allison's belongings and informed me that all communication was to be through her, and I was not to speak directly to her client. Almost not a word was said during the process. One of the movers wanted to use the restroom, so I showed him where it was. This was the longest conversation ever. Allison ignored me and avoided being around me as much as possible. The faintest glimmers of possible reconciliation were finally extinguished. The entire process ended up going without incident. 90 minutes after their arrival, they left. The bottom line for me was that my house felt even emptier with the last remaining traces of Allison gone. A few days later, Leland called me. "Looks like your soon-to-be ex-wife is laying claim to the house," Leland said. Previously, when we spoke, he believed that since I purchased the house before marriage, and only my name was on the title, the house would be exempt from community property status. It turns out the court might look at it a little differently, he said. In Oregon, the court assumes that spouses contributed equally to the acquisition of most property during the marriage, regardless of what is stated on the title. Don't worry too much about it yet, Leland said. I'll figure it out. I have a few ideas. I noticed that when I was home alone, I often checked the news to get the latest information about Novosim and Adrian Vasquez. I even received several more letters addressed to Allison as a Novosim employee. I unethically opened them, read them, and then threw them away. Based on early testing, the product appears to be effective. However, the FDA has not yet approved it. They were waiting for some tests in Maryland. Meanwhile, Novosim's IPO was scheduled to launch simultaneously with FDA approval. Of course, Adrian Vasquez was the focus of all the news about Novosim. Sometimes quotes or comments from Dr. Gupta appeared in the interviews, but mostly it was Vasquez. He was without question the face of the product. He led the push, talking about Novosim as a new miracle drug that would change lives. What Vasquez didn't say in those interviews, but was noted by financial analysts, was the potential wealth that could be realized once the product was approved by the FDA. It seemed that Vasquez's dreams of wealth and power were coming true. Even though reading about it made my mood worse, I continued to do it. Luckily, I had other things to do to distract me from this obsession. One of those things was an upcoming sales conference. I had to make sure I was ready. I was given a 20-minute speaking slot on the penultimate day of the conference. My plan was to lay out my sales strategy and recognize my team. Then I planned to walk through a specific sales scenario and explain what we did to achieve success. I was so caught up in this and other tasks as the conference approached that I forgot about one important aspect of the trip to Hawaii. I paid in advance and booked another week on Kauai after the conference. I remembered booking a hotel on my way back from Kauai last year. It seemed such a long time ago, a much happier time. But as I understand, I missed the window for canceling the reservation. I needed to call the Kaloa Landing Hotel and look at all my options. The thought of going there alone gave me mixed feelings. That Wednesday, Leland, my lawyer, called me. I may have good news for us, Michael, he said. Okay, I replied, I need some good news. Leland explained to me that inheritances are generally not subject to division because inheritances are not considered marital property. Instead, the inheritance is treated as separate property belonging to the person who received it and cannot be divided between the parties in a divorce. But because Allison mixed her inheritance with the marital money and then took the inheritance and some of the family money to invest in Mr. Vasquez's company, I have a claim on the entire investment. I was confused, so I told Leland that I wanted nothing to do with her questionable investment in Novosim. I understand that, my boy, Leland replied patiently, but my plan is to arrange for Allison to keep 100% of the investment and you to keep 100% of the house. Suddenly, I realized that this was good news. I asked him if it would work. Her lawyer is playing hardball for now, Leland told me, but I see some softening. I think if you send me an email this afternoon agreeing to do this, I believe we can get the whole thing done in a few days, maybe a week. After sending the email, I looked at my to-do list. The next step was to call the hotel on Kauai. The woman I spoke to was quite kind and listened to me as I briefly explained the situation, leaving out my family issues. Sir, she began, I am very sorry, but the 30-day cancellation and refund period has long expired. However, as a Marriott member, I can upgrade your room to an ocean view for free. I thanked her, still not knowing what to do. Go to Kauai alone? I've been thinking about this for a while. Finally, I came to a conclusion. I had vacation days. The hotel was prepaid, and I could not get the money back. I felt like I needed a rest. I decided to take a week off on my own. I was busy in the 2 weeks leading up to the sales conference. I continued to work late into the night, often returning home long after dinner. On the weekends, I continued to exercise and work around the house. I was once told that you need to rehearse any speech at least 10 times before delivering it. I spent a lot of time preparing my speech in front of my full-length mirror. Another thing I kept doing was watching Novosim. It seemed like the FDA decision and IPO were getting closer. Every time I saw Vasquez's smiling face on television, I became angry and slightly nauseous. Finally, the day of departure arrived. I saw and said hello to several other Pincus employees at the airport, including Gail. As I walked toward a small group of colleagues, my phone rang. Michael, it was Leland Wells, I have good news. I had to cover my free ear with my hand to hear him among all the noise and announcements at the airport. I asked him to repeat what he had just said. Good news, my boy, Leland began. I forced that bitch, your wife's lawyer, to give up her claim to a share of your house. You keep your pension, give Allison 60% of your savings and checking accounts. There will be no alimony. Leland, that's great, I told him, but it sounds too good. What's the catch? It seems to me that they believe that investing in that startup company will bring in a lot of money. You will have to give up any rights to this. I thought for a moment. Should I go after all the money they were going to make from Novosim? I quickly realized that I didn't want anything to do with Novosim or Vasquez. Do it, I told Leland, and suddenly I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had a house, I had a job that I loved and was good at, I was still young, and I was in the best shape of my entire adult life. Buoyed by these thoughts, my mood improved leading up to the sales conference. The first evening was devoted to a reception meeting at the hotel in one of the halls. One of those who did not come up and congratulate was Angela Ridley. I saw her across the room at some point. She seemed to have gained weight. I knew the next 3 days would be busy and told my team to have a good time, but make sure they were at the first meeting in the morning on time. The meetings on Wednesday went well. As a manager, I had different responsibilities than in my previous role. At some point, we were discussing one of our new products that was launched not so successfully. We did not meet the forecasts for it. It turned out that my team, led by Gail, actually exceeded the plan by 10% on this product. A question came from the audience. It was Miss Negative, Angela Ridley. How are we supposed to sell this product if there is no demand for it? The audience fell silent. It was not normal protocol to question the strategic path that management was guiding us on. Suddenly, Don Clemens stood up and turned towards Angela. Perhaps Michael Ballantyne can talk about the success they have had in this region, Clemens said. For a moment, I was stunned. Several people turned to me expectantly. As I sat there, I heard a comment from the area where Angela was sitting. Lucky, said a female voice. It was probably Ridley. This drove me crazy. I stood up and addressed the audience. Yes, whoever said lucky, you are right, I began. I am fortunate to work with a dedicated team of professional sales representatives who believe in the direction management has given us. Oh, and one more thing about luck that my old football coach taught me. The harder you work, the luckier you become. And with that, I sat down. At first, there was only a few applause, but soon most of the people in the room began clapping. Some stood up. I was proud and embarrassed at the same time. As we were getting ready to go to the luau, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face on the TV screen. The bar was so loud that I couldn't understand what was being said. I tried to stop for a moment to hear something from the TV, but was carried forward by the movement of our group. I soon found myself on the sand, heading towards the bright lights of the luau. The image of Gupta that I saw in the bar resurfaced in my memory. I wondered why he was on television. Soon, all the luau activities distracted me from the image of Dr. Vijay Gupta being interviewed on television. One by one, I marked each member. Everyone seemed okay, and then I saw Gail. We were having dinner next to each other, and I noticed how much she enjoyed the Mai Tai. Now I saw her a little unstable, surrounded by a group of guys. There can be many dynamics in such meetings, including sexual ones. It's a badge of honor for a guy to achieve a conquest. For a girl, it's the opposite, a reputation that can kill her career. I know it's unfair, but that's how it was perceived. I decided that I needed to save Gail. I approached the group and politely but firmly inserted myself into it. "Gail," I began, "do you have a minute? I need to discuss a couple of things with you," I said. She readily agreed, and we walked away, with minor protests from the remaining guys. I just destroyed several of their ideas about sexual conquest. We walked along the beach past the hotel. "Are you having a good time?" I asked her. She said yes, stuttering slightly, but it seemed like she was trying to compose herself. Then I told her that at such events you need to be careful. There are many eyes watching everyone, and even at a fun event like a luau where there is a lot of drinking, we need to remember that this is still a business event and we need to be professional. We walked along the shore quietly for several minutes after this conversation. Finally, she said something. "Did I embarrass myself tonight?" she asked. "Have I disgraced you?" I told her no, but we all need to be careful in this environment. Eventually, we returned to the hotel. Naturally, I walked her to her room. "Tomorrow is another big day," I told her as she looked for her room key. "Thank you, Michael," Gail said, looking into my eyes, leaning towards me and kissing me on the cheek. I was surprised by the kiss. I awkwardly leaned away, wished her good night, and went to my room. Her natural attractiveness and kiss excited and confused me. She was my subordinate. I hired her. These thoughts distracted me as I entered my room and got ready for bed. I didn't sleep well that night. I was mostly nervous about my presentation, which was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. But meeting Gail and kissing her at her door bothered me. On the one hand, I really liked her, and the kiss was pleasant. On the other hand, she was my subordinate, and Pincus had a policy against fraternization, even between consenting parties. Plus, I wasn't sure if I was still legally married. With this in mind, I emailed Leland Wells. I was surprised when I received a response from him right away. I quickly realized that 5:27 in the morning Hawaiian time was almost 8:30 on the West Coast. Of course, he was in the office. In my letter, I asked him if the divorce went through. I received a quick response. "My boy, as of 4:34 last Tuesday evening, you have not been officially married. The documents were filed with the court." Okay, that settled the matter. Emotionally, the news left me feeling relieved and a little empty. However, I had other things to worry about. First of all, my presentation. Careers can depend on individual moments. I wanted to make sure I was ready. Another thought that constantly distracted me was Gail. At the morning meeting, my group gathered around me again. I noticed Gail when she entered the room. She looked good, no sign of yesterday's Mai Tai. When she arrived, she walked towards me. "Sorry about last night," she told me quietly. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, and we left it at that. My presentation went well, and several members of management, including Don Clemens, congratulated me. I even received positive words from Helen Fletcher. In a good mood, I told my group that Thursday night was a free evening, but I had a reservation at Duke's for 6:30. It was optional, but I invited my whole team. The evening turned out to be pleasant and relaxing. Everyone was there except Gail. I was a little disappointed by her absence, but I understood. I just hoped there wouldn't be any awkwardness between us. The next day, there were closing remarks from Helen Fletcher, followed by an awards ceremony conducted by CEO Arthur Goodfellow. It was interesting to think that just 2 years ago, I was surprised to receive the Territory Sales Representative of the Year award. I was happy with the trajectory of my career path. Suddenly, I realized that the meeting was over and I was on vacation. An unusual vacation, of course. I was alone, but I decided to enjoy it. I told myself that I would put off thinking about Allison, Vasquez, Novosim, or anything related to that. I was going to take a week, relax, and ignore all these negative distractions. I spent the rest of the day running around, exploring new places, and then collapsed on a lounge chair by the world-class pool with a bottle of Coors Light. The wonderful smell and feel of Hawaii was indescribable. I sighed, and soon the exhaustion from the whole week caught up with me. I fell asleep. The next day I got up and decided to run in the opposite direction along the beach to Poipu. The first part of the run was on a paved road with a beautiful view of the ocean. The path then passed through the Sheraton grounds and continued along the beach to Poipu. When I started my return trip, it was late morning and the Hawaiian sun was blazing. I stopped for a drink of water at the Sheraton. Just as I was about to leave the Sheraton, I heard someone calling my name. I turned around, surprised, to see Gail sitting on a lounge chair by the pool, waving at me. Joyfully, I ran to her place. "Hello," I greeted her. My smile was wide and sincere. "Are you staying here?" I asked. She said yes. She said she had always wanted to go to Kauai and remembered me talking about my previous trips and how beautiful it was. We chatted a little about what a coincidence it was to see each other and what a great beach the Sheraton had. Then she asked me a logical question. "Where are you and your wife staying?" she asked. I froze. "I'm at Kaloa Landing, just up the road," I replied. He took a deep breath and continued, "And my wife is not with me. In fact, as of last Tuesday, she is officially my ex-wife." The conversation somewhat stalled at this point. Finally, I asked her what her plans were for the rest of the day. She said that she was on vacation and had no plans. "I was going to go to Waimea Canyon. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a look." "This is exciting," I told her. We agreed, and I picked her up later that day. We had a great time enjoying incredible views on the far west of the island. On the way back, we discussed our specific plans for our vacation. It turned out that we were both in the same mood. Just enjoy a break from real life, sit in the sun, and enjoy Hawaii. She said she planned to just have dinner at Lava's at the Sheraton and watch the sunset. "Sounds great," I replied. "Can I join you?" I asked. She stopped, studying me with her eyes. "Gail, if this bothers you, I completely understand," I told her. "No," she said, "everything is fine tonight. Come around 7, that will give me time to shower and get ready." When I saw Gail that evening, she looked amazing. We ate dinner, had a few drinks, and chatted about 50/50ths, discussing Pincus Lab's business and just general conversations about Hawaii and our lives. After dinner, we walked along the ocean shore, carrying our sandals. I began to experience new feelings for her. We arrived back at the Sheraton in the dark, and it seemed like the evening was over. I felt so good being with her that I didn't want it to end. I asked her what she was doing tomorrow. "Sunbathing, swimming in the ocean, studying a Kauai travel book, and reading my pulp novel," she told me. I laughed and said I might see her jogging again, and although a kiss or a hug or some sign of physical contact would have seemed appropriate given the closeness of our day, I simply turned and waved goodbye. The next morning, I ran the same route as the day before, past the Sheraton to Poipu Beach and back. On the way back, I stopped at the Sheraton, and sure enough, Gail was there, and she looked great. When I walked over to her lounge chair and sat down next to her, it took a lot of effort to maintain eye contact with her. Two slender spheres, only partially covered, drew my eyes down. At one point, she caught me peeping, and a small smile appeared on her face. I told her I was going to Shipwreck Beach in front of the Hyatt and climb the sand cliffs. "You want to go?" I asked. She looked at me and answered, "Michael, you don't need to be my guide. This is your vacation. I can handle things myself," she said. "Okay," I said, confused by her comment. "But I really want to spend time with you," I said without thinking. I just blurted out what I was really thinking. She paused and studied me, looked at me as if she wanted to understand more, then sighed and said, "I think I want to spend time with you too," she said, avoiding eye contact with me. Oh, forget it. How about we meet at your place in an hour," she said. We went to the public access to Shipwreck Beach at the Hyatt. We walked along the cliffs. The sun was shining on us, but the coolness from the winds was pleasant. At one point, I asked her to put sunscreen on my back, and then I did the same for her. It was a small thing in my mind, but it was still a new level of intimacy between me and Gail. It was late afternoon when I dropped her off back at the Sheraton. Over the course of the day, the remaining awkwardness between us disappeared. Part of the vacation, with thoughts of work put aside, I no longer thought of her as an employee at all. I found a place in my book about Kauai for dinner Want to join? Asked Gail. Where, of course, I said, smiling at the fact that the questions about our time together seemed to be over. We went to Kyoki's that night. This is a fun restaurant and bar in Kahlua. We ordered drinks. Gail had a Mai Tai, and I ordered a local beer. Kyoki's had a festive atmosphere, and Gail was on her second Mai Tai before dinner arrived. We were chatting about various topics when Gail randomly brought up one particular topic. Hey, I heard something about Novacom and that Adrian guy today, Gail casually mentioned. My reaction stunned her. Gail, I interrupted her. Please, I promised myself not to think or talk about this topic while I'm on this vacation. She fell silent without saying anything, stunned. The thing is, I told her seriously, the wounds are still too fresh. A minute later, she answered. Obviously, I knew there was some level of conflict, she said. I was there when we saw them together, her in that bikini. And then when you asked me to spy on her car, I'm smart enough to realize something was wrong. I nodded silently. Then I thought that I really needed to tell someone, so I kept everything inside. It couldn't be great. So despite a few doubts, I started telling her the whole story. I started with that Pincus Sales conference 2 years ago, and then my meeting with Vasquez at Secret Beach. I read about this beach in my book about Kauai. It looked pretty interesting, Gail commented. Sorry, continue. She encouraged me to continue. At that moment, they brought us the bill, and I interrupted the story to pay it. We walked back. The sky was still colored by the recent sunset. The air was warm and pleasant. I continued my story of troubles. At one point, I almost choked up explaining how my marriage failed because of greed more than passion. Gail, who had been walking close to me the entire time, took my hand. It was such a small gesture, but at the same time so intimate. We continued walking along the beach past the Sheraton, still holding each other's hands. We stopped in one of these unlit areas, and I turned around and I hugged her, and we kissed. That was incredible, to be on this beautiful beach with this fantastic woman. Suddenly, we were interrupted by a wave that washed over us, and we turned and walked back. This time, my arm was around her shoulders, keeping her close to me. We chatted and discussed Kauai and places we would still like to visit. Do you really want to go to Secret Beach? I asked. It's a little hard to find. She looked at me with a half smile, as if I had just directly asked her to show me her breasts. We'll see, she said. By this time, we had already arrived at her hotel. Hand in hand, we walked to her room, and when she was looking for the key, I kissed her on the back of her head. We both stumbled into her room, hugging each other like we had just moments ago on the beach. We made it to the bed, and I turned back to her. But this time, Gail raised both hands in a stop gesture. Michael, she said, breathing heavily, stop, I think we're going too fast. I like you, but... Okay, I get it, I said, torn between physical need and common sense. I like you too, and you look so good. I glanced at her partially exposed breasts. I couldn't help myself. Let's just slow down. There's a lot of complexity here, she said, adjusting her clothes and standing up. Okay, you're probably right, I said. See you tomorrow, I added and kissed her goodbye. Returning to my hotel, I felt good. Was happy about the developing relationship with Gail. I knew we would have some work issues to figure out, but I was confident that we could get through everything. I also felt relieved to finally share my feelings about my failed marriage. I fell asleep with pleasant thoughts. The next day, I did my usual run at the usual time, stopping at the Sheraton on the way back. I was really looking forward to meeting Gail. There were so many things I wanted to tell her, and I was also hoping for a trip to the secret beach with her. I looked at the sun loungers by the pool. Gail wasn't there. I thought. I waited another 20 minutes, and every time someone new entered the pool area, I hoped it would be Gail. I sent her a text. I decided to go back to my room, shower, and get ready for the day. Right before the shower, I texted her again. Call me when you wake up. I got out of the shower, put on shorts, and checked my phone. No messages. I was disappointed and began to worry. Did I push too hard last night? Is it possible that I not only ruined a potential romance, but also compromised my relationship with my subordinate? Can my behavior be considered sexual harassment? Is it possible that I could lose my job? Suddenly, the pleasant cocoon of vacation was coming to an end. I was on a return flight. I knew I would have a lot to do when I got back. Monday morning will come quickly. I needed to prepare for a budget meeting, check sales, answer a mountain of emails, and meet with HR about hiring. I did not plan this additional hiring. The first thing I did on Monday morning was check my voicemail. My management and my subordinates all knew that I was absent last week, but I still had quite a lot of messages. I quickly listened, took notes, and prioritized the various voicemails. Suddenly, and this confused me for a minute, there was a message from Allison. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but the familiarity of her voice stunned me. "Hey, Michael, for some reason I was thinking about you." Then there was a pause long enough for me to think she had hung up. "Anyway, if you get a chance, I'd like to talk to you." It was strange. The last time I saw her, I was told to communicate with her only through her lawyer. The tone of her voice seemed strange. Shy, insecure, vulnerable. I couldn't help myself. No matter what, I was still very attracted to her. I needed to think about it. I promised myself that I would deal with all this. In my mind, I put this message aside and continued to work. I met with HR and we started the hiring process again. Carl, my boss, invited me to lunch, and although I planned to work non-stop, I changed my plans and agreed. We were talking about a lot of things over lunch, discussing recent events, and suddenly he brought up a certain topic. "What do you think about what's happening with Novosim?" he asked. I stared at him in bewilderment without saying a word. Last week in Hawaii, I deliberately tuned out all the news. "Perhaps you haven't heard," Carl continued, interpreting my expression. "Novosim is having problems with clinical trials. Gupta and his team panic. In fact, some of their investors are talking about criminal charges." I was overcome with different emotions as I absorbed Carl's words. Of course, out of curiosity, I made it a hobby to follow this company. But most of all, there was joy. I was glad to see Vasquez in trouble after all his arrogant talk about money and lifestyle. Carl, a scientist by training, began to explain how the drug was approved by the FDA. It consists of 5 stages. Stage 1 discovery and development, Stage 2 preclinical studies, Stage 3 clinical studies, Stage 4 FDA review and approval of the drug, and Stage 5 post-authorization monitoring of the drug's safety by the FDA. The clinical trial phase can take years to complete. However, once studies show that a drug is safe and beneficial, the FDA typically reviews and either approves or rejects a new drug application within 6 months. According to Carl, Novosim produced inconsistent results in clinical trials. This was bad news for the product. Moreover, they raised a lot of money by claiming that the clinical trials were successful. As far as I know, clinical trials were conducted without significant evidence several years ago in India, Carl told me. I think Adrian and Dr. Gupta could be in serious trouble. They claimed that the tests were successful and confirmed. "Is it true?" I asked. "What about all that money they raised?" "I'm not entirely sure," Carl replied, "but I hear people talking about investment fraud around this whole Novosim situation." Investment fraud. This, in my opinion, is a crime. I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy at Vasquez's misfortunes. And then, for a moment, I thought about Ollie and her legacy. In spite of everything that had happened between us, I felt sorry for her. I worked until the evening. By 7 o'clock, I was exhausted. The change in time zones was taking its toll. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone vibrated and I was hoping, but no, it was Allison's number. I hesitated, but still answered. She still had influence over me. "Allison," I answered with uncertainty. "Hi," she said, that timid, vulnerable tone in her voice again. "What's happened?" I asked her. There was a pause, and I heard her quietly crying. "Michael, I really ruined everything," she said with emotion in her voice. "I ruined my life, my career, my future. but most of all our marriage. We discussed it, and I have to say that she still had power over me. My natural instinct was to protect her, to tell her that everything would be fine, to take care of her. But there were other feelings, and I knew it wouldn't be fair. "Michael, can I see you?" she asked. I hesitated without answering her, considering all the possible consequences. "Don't make me beg. Just say yes," she whispered to me. In the end, with reservations, I agreed. I told her that we could meet on Thursday night. She wanted to meet at my house. She called it home. I insisted on meeting in a public place. We decided to meet at Zen Zen near my office. We talked about minor things at first, but the circumstances of our divorce were a slightly tangible presence in the conversation. Finally, I asked her. "So, Ollie," I began, bringing up an important topic, "what's going on in your life?" At first, she burst into tears, and several minutes passed before she could speak calmly. She told me that Novicim had not lived up to the expectations that Adrian had promised. I knew part of it, but I didn't say anything. Suddenly, all the investors were demanding their money back. Ollie said that she had asked Adrian about her money, and he kept saying that she would get it, that everything was fine. She just had to wait a bit, he told her. She then proceeded to tell me how stupid she was and how all she wanted was to get me back. "Michael, please," she begged, "give me a second chance. I'll do anything, anything. I will be a better wife and even mother someday if you want." I must say that all this was very tempting. She was still very attractive to me, and her remorse seemed genuine. But a lot has changed recently. I told her that I needed time to think about it. "Michael, I understand," she said, signs of hope visible on her face. "How about this weekend? I can come home and we can talk again." I told her that I already had plans, but I was free on Sunday. "Great," she said happily. "I'll cook dinner." With trepidation, I agreed. Most of all, I wanted to know the details of what happened. I had a good weekend, and suddenly Sunday came. I didn't tell anyone about the meeting with Allison. On Sunday evening, as agreed, Ollie arrived and entered the house without knocking, as if she was still living there. She was bringing food to dinner. "Michael, can you open the wine?" she asked. When I took out the bottle, she lightly touched me and kissed me on the cheek. I noticed something in our communication, and then I saw her fussing in the kitchen. A minute later, I realized that she was not wearing a bra. She knew I liked it. She prepared a delicious dinner, and during dinner our conversation was light, without the heavy topics that destroyed our marriage. Finally, I asked her what was going on with Novicim and Vasquez and Dr. Gupta and all this. The illusion of a normal home life was broken. She stopped, took a deep breath, and finally answered. "Adrian keeps saying that Novicim will still be brought to market, but the timing has changed. All investors demand their money back. I also asked for my money back." She continued, "Dr. Gupta has left the country and is now in some Asian country that does not have an extradition treaty with the US. Adrian receives notifications from the Department of Justice all the time asking for information. He's ignoring them for now." "So," I began, "he still lives in a luxurious house?" "Yes," she replied, "for now. But Michael, let's talk about something else. I don't want to think about all this tonight." After dinner, we moved into the living room. I sat on the sofa, and Ollie sat next to me, very close. I felt a little uncomfortable. She reached over the back of the sofa and began to stroke my arm. She leaned forward, and her shirt fell open. Her bare breasts were almost visible. She moved closer. She knew how to turn me on, and she did it. She kissed me. I watched her look at me. She had a plan, and I fell for it. Suddenly, my memories of my last days in Hawaii came flooding back. It wasn't fair. Suddenly, I stood up. "Michael!" Allison was surprised at my reaction. "What happened?" "All," I told her, my anger rising. "You think you can just ruin our marriage, sleep with another man, lie to me, treat me like crap, call me boring, and then when something goes wrong in your exciting new life, show me some breasts and everything will be okay." "I think it's time for you to leave," I told her, suddenly feeling guilty. "But Michael," she said, This is our home. I know I've been gone, but it's time for me to come home. House, I exploded. You traded our home for the promise of wealth and the opportunity to sleep with another man. If you remember, your life with me was boring. You said that you needed more emotions. Okay, I see you need some time, she said, still confident that we would make up. I'll leave, she said, and as she walked out the door, I heard her say under her breath, bye. Thoughts swirled around my head. She still had little power over me, and I was tempted. But so much has changed. My life has changed a lot over the past year. I thought about Ollie, Vasquez, Novosum, my career in Pincus, divorce, and finally found a pleasant topic to think about. Gail. My thoughts turned to the rest of my vacation on Kauai. As you may remember, the day after Gail and I kissed and became intimate, I suddenly couldn't find her. She didn't answer calls or messages. It was confusing and disturbing. I spent a terrible night worrying and wondering if I had made a big mistake that could affect not only my personal life, but also my career. Nothing. Gail was nowhere to be seen. With mixed feelings, I walked back to my hotel. I had not yet reached my room when suddenly my phone vibrated. It was a message from Gail. Excitedly, I read the message. You should have the document delivered to your hotel room this morning. I thought. It didn't sound good. I hurried to my room. When I walked in, I saw a 9x12 envelope shoved under the door. I quickly opened it. I have read the document. It was a letter of resignation from Gail Beverly, effective this Friday. Oh no, I broke our relationship. I wondered if it cost me my job. And besides thinking about myself, if I offended Gail, I needed to apologize. I sent her a message asking her to meet and sort things out. A moment later, the answer came. Be patient, you have to get a few more deliveries. At that moment, I heard a muffled rustling and saw a second envelope appear under my door. Nervously, I opened the second envelope. It took a few minutes to figure out what was in the envelope. After a few moments, I understood. Pincus Labs had a strict no fraternization policy. Key pages of the longer document were stapled together. The following passage has been highlighted. Pincus Labs' no fraternization policy sets a boundary between the professional and personal lives of colleagues. The policy sets boundaries in the workplace and allows employees to behave respectfully towards their colleagues. Personal relationships between managers and their direct reports are prohibited. Did she report me? Should I receive some ominous message from HR? I was much more confused now than before I received these messages. Sitting in my room, the pages of the document laid out on the bed, I did not understand what was happening. For a moment, I thought about Gail. I was thinking about our intimacy just a night ago. I really thought we had something. It seems I was wrong. A moment later, there was a quick double knock on my door. It scared me. It took a moment to reach the door and open it. There was a small square box in the hotel hallway, too big to fit under the door. My name was written in black letters on a white box. Michael. At first, I didn't understand what was in the box. And then, under the main content, I found a page from a book about Kauai called Secret Beach. It looks like the page was torn out. And then I realized I couldn't stop smiling. It was the top of her red bikini. Top section, linked to Secret Beach. Everything was starting to come together. Then the two previous messages. Her resignation letter, and then pointing to the company policy document. I think I've begun to understand this mystery. I noticed another note. Meet me in your hotel lobby and get your stuff for a day at the beach. I quickly gathered everything I needed for the beach. I hurried into the lobby and there sat Gail, studying the road map. She looked at me with a big smile, stood up, and we hugged. What were you doing, stranger? She asked, still smiling. We have a lot to discuss, I told her, happy but still puzzled. Don't worry, she said. We have a long way to go and plenty of time to talk. And we had it. Gail told me that she had always liked me in a friendly way, but during her week on Kauai, her feelings had deepened. I definitely wanted you that night, but I knew there were, she paused, obstacles. I understand. We worked together. I was her manager. I remembered the document about the ban on fraternization that she gave me. I nodded silently as she continued. I really like my job, she explained, but I decided I liked you better. She told me that she had discussed the opportunity to work in the veterinary department of Pincus with one of the hiring managers during a sales conference. Something like, "If you ever want to work on the windy side, we will create a place for you." I didn't even think much of it at the time, but now, she looked at me, it made sense. I had mixed feelings listening to what Gail had to say. I definitely didn't want to lose her as a sales rep. But I definitely didn't want to lose her as, well, at this stage, I wasn't sure how to characterize our relationship. I just knew I liked her. She told me that she had deliberately avoided me the previous day for several reasons. First, she wanted to be sure of her feelings, and then she had to arrange a transfer to the veterinary department. There was a lot of paperwork, she told me. We continued our discussion until I directed her to the exit to Secret Beach. As we got out of the car, I realized I was still holding the white box containing her bikini top. "Do you want it?" I asked, holding the top. "I don't think I'll need it," she said. My day suddenly became even better. Gail and I spent the last 3 days of our vacation together, spending a lot of time either in her bed or mine. As we descended the trail that day and walked to the West End, I wasn't sure how comfortable Gail would be with nudity or not on a public beach. We set up our towels, chairs, and refrigerator, and then the moment arrived. On the way back home, we agreed to sit next to each other and had a different type of conversation. I wanted us to be open and honest with each other, which I realized too late did not happen between me and Ollie. We decided that we would date each other exclusively and see what happens. The topics of cohabitation, long-term plans, and life goals were not discussed specifically, but I felt that we had similar hopes for the relationship. She told me one thing that I was determined to do. Make sure you deal with all your feelings for your ex. That's why there was a meeting at Zen Zen and dinner at my house. I wanted to make sure any residual feelings were gone, and they disappeared. In a brief email, I made sure Ollie knew there was no chance of reconciliation. The relationship between Gail and I was progressing, and we were happy. The topics of cohabitation, commitment, and marriage became enjoyable topics to discuss. It was impossible not to compare Gail and Ollie. While Ollie's beauty was immediate and obvious, my physical attraction to Gail grew and grew. One thing I kept following was Novosum and Adrian Vasquez. In an attempt at self-preservation, he now cooperated with the Department of Justice and helped investors get some of their money back. It was cents on the dollar. Naturally, Vasquez argued that all the blame lay with Dr. Gupta. He wasn't here to defend himself. I also learned that somehow Vasquez had kept a beautiful house in Sylvania, and somewhere, and I forget where, I learned that Ollie was still living there. Even though I was much happier with Gail than I ever was with Ollie, it still bothered me that Vasquez was able to keep this house after deceiving all these people, and Ollie was enjoying it too. It was a Wednesday evening in early February. I was still living alone in my house. Gail was here often, but she hadn't fully moved in yet. She wasn't here that particular evening. As I entered the house, I grabbed my mail, opened the door, and balanced my work backpack and mail as I closed the door. Subconsciously, I noticed that the house was too dark. Before I could turn on the light, something hit me hard on the back of my head, and I lost consciousness. Slowly, I came to my senses. I became aware of a sharp pain in the back of my head. I also realized that I could not move my arms and legs. One of the table lamps, its shade raised, shone brightly in my face. The rest of the house was in darkness. I was still dizzy, but I felt, rather than saw, a silhouette behind the lamp. "Good morning," I heard a strange, high-pitched voice. "Who are you?" I managed to say. "Who am I?" He laughed joylessly in the same high-pitched voice. "I will either be your best friend or your worst enemy. You decide." "I don't understand," I said, completely confused. By this point, I realized that I was taped to the chair. "Of course," he began, "let me explain. You see, I invested $500,000 in your company, and now I want them back. I was told that they would be worth much more than my investment, but all I want is my 500,000 back, he told me calmly and pleasantly. Maybe it was a blow to the head. I have no idea what you're talking about, I told him. My name is Tobin Chester, he said, and I saw movement in the dark. He was rolling out something on one of my tables. I heard the metallic sound of instruments. So we have two options, still in the same high, calm and polite voice, but with a threatening undertone. You can give me my money now, or you can force me to use persuasion. With these words, he turned the lamp so that it shined on the table. There, on the table, lay an assortment of precision instruments. Suddenly, a deep fear rose within me. Wait, I panicked and started sweating. What money? What investment? What company? You know what I'm talking about. I found your address through business records. I put all my savings into fucking Novasum, the miracle drug, and I want my money back. I finally understood. I remembered the letters addressed to Ollie for Novasum, with my address. That's why he was at my house. He thought it was Novasum's address. Listen, I pleaded. There's a mistake here. I know about Novacom, but I have nothing to do with it, I continued. Actually, the people from Novacom. Keep silent, he barked at me, the calmness from earlier gone. I want, he began, the blades cutting through my shirt. My money, he continued, tearing off pieces of my shirt, revealing my naked body. Back, he shouted. Okay, he began, examining my bare skin. Usually all it takes is a little convincing, he said, leaning towards me. Let's get back to the question of my money. Silently, I pointed to my backpack, unable to speak. He followed my gesture. Maybe he thought there was money there. He opened and carefully examined every folder, my wallet, my business cards, and all the other contents of the backpack. What is all this? He asked with a puzzled look on his face. Can I whispered through the pain, tell you a story? He nodded quickly. She should be good, with the same strange high voice. So I told him. Talked about Pincus Labs, the meeting, and then meeting Vasquez at Secret Beach. He listened especially carefully when I talked about the topless part. Good news, he listened. I continued to tell him about how Ollie and Vasquez started their relationship, her investment in Novacom, the divorce, and her life there. Finally, I told him. I bet I hate that guy a lot more than you, I told him through the pain. He was silent, studying me. He walked a few steps back and forth, still looking at me. It's a good story, and I really think I believe you, he told me, but none of it helps me get my money back. I have an idea, I told him, wincing in pain. I told him that I knew where Vasquez lived. I told him in detail about the house, the grounds, and everything else I knew about Vasquez. If there's money anywhere, I said, it's in this territory. He continued to look at me, still processing everything I said. But do me one favor, I whispered. Make him pay. Cruel. Chester nodded and, to my great relief, began to put away his instruments of torture. At that moment, I suddenly realized where I had seen him before. It was a strange man in a beret that I saw at Novacom meetings. Apparently, Vasquez managed to convince Chester. Okay, he said, give me the details. The only person I shared this whole terrible experience with was Gail. I was sure that Tobin Chester would not come back for either me or Gail, but I wanted to make sure she was aware. Of course, she wanted me to report all this to the police. I nodded and told her I would think about it. I always tried to be honest with Gail, but this was an unusual situation. I never mentioned the conversation with Chester or where Vasquez lived. Although I trusted her 100%, I didn't want to put her in any danger if something did happen to Vasquez. Several weeks have passed since that evening with Chester, and the ordinary circumstances of life began to distract me from that topic. The work continued positively for both Gail and me. Another thing happened during this period. I proposed to Gail. She agreed, and we were now officially engaged. With so much going on, believe it or not, I somehow forgot about the conversation with Tobin Chester. Suddenly, I was reminded of this by the local news. Violent attack at luxury home in western suburbs. Wow, I could not imagine the horror that Vasquez experienced. A small sample of what I experienced with Chester kept me up at night if I allowed my mind to wander back to that experience. I tried never to think about it. Despite the horrific attack, for which I felt some degree of responsibility, life went on for me and Gail. Wedding plans were moving forward. Unlike the big country club wedding reception that Allison and I had, this will be a smaller event at a nearby bistro that we rented for the evening. A few weeks before the wedding, I heard some interesting news about Vasquez and Allison. Due to long hospital stays and lack of health insurance, he lost his beautiful home. I later learned that he had moved back to California to live with family members. They said his wounds would heal, but the psychological damage caused by the attack would have long-term consequences. Gail's condominium lease ended, and she moved in with me just a few months before her wedding. She was already visiting me often, so the transition was minimal. One thing she insisted on and bought for the house was a hot tub. It was Saturday evening. Dinner was long over, and it was dark outside. Gail opened a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir and invited me to join her in the hot tub. I watched SportsCenter. It was an easy choice. Baseball score or my naked future wife with big breasts in the hot tub. I'll look at the score in the newspaper tomorrow. Then the doorbell rang. I looked out the side window, and there, strangely enough, was Allison standing on my porch. I thought about not opening the door, but I knew that I needed to deal with this issue directly and firmly. "Allison," I said as I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked her. "Michael, oh Michael," she began. "I just need to talk to you. Everything went wrong. Please give me a few minutes," she begged. I still had a small, soft spot for her, and against my better judgment, I reluctantly agreed. She began a long, rambling story about her life, how she was supposed to live this wonderful life with beautiful houses, sports cars, and travel. At some point, I realized that she had been drinking. I was silent. "And then that creep Adrian took all my money," she said. I could have said, "I told you so," but what was the point? She said that Adrian was attacked by this crazy guy and was seriously injured. I had to move out. And now I live in a crappy little apartment in South Portland, and I'm trying to sell real estate. Michael, now focusing on me after her tale of adversity, "Couldn't we try again?" she asked me. I was so surprised by her absurd request that I was momentarily speechless. At this moment, the cavalry arrived. Gail, topless with a towel over her shoulders, walked into the living room, her large breasts swaying from side to side as she approached. "Michael, can you bring me another bottle of wine when you—" she began. The high back of the chair Allison was sitting in prevented her from seeing Gail until she spoke. "What?" Allison gasped when she heard Gail's voice. She turned her head to see Gail walking into the room, partially naked. Her mouth opened in surprise. Clearly, Allison was unaware of Gail's presence. "Long time no see, I know," I began, filling the pause. "Allison, this is my fiancée, Gail Beverly. I think you've met before." Allison's eyes opened wide. She stood up abruptly and walked towards the door without a word. "It's good to see you again," Gail called as Allison ran away. "Now about the bottle of wine," Gail calmly told me. Gail and I discussed the possibility of moving immediately after the wedding. Now, almost 3 years later, we realized we needed a bigger house. We were frugal, living on my income and saving what Gail earned. Luckily, Gail and I were on the same page financially. With the equity in my home and a large amount of savings, we could afford a larger home with all the features we wanted in the area we wanted. "Oh wow, here's something worth seeing. It's in Harmon Hills. Great schools in this area," Gail told me as she studied the ad on her iPad. It was Saturday morning, and we planned to visit a few open houses today. We agreed to sell our house. Now we just needed to find a new one. Gail and I wanted a family home. Home for a long time. "Michael," she said, turning to me with a smile, "there is a pool there." A pool was on our wish list, but in Portland, Oregon, homes with pools are rare. "Okay," I said, "let's see." We walked through the open front door. We took off our shoes and put on cloth shoe covers to protect the floor. We heard voices from another part of the house as we entered the living room. We walked through the dining room. There was a large window overlooking the front garden. As we explored the kitchen, the voices got closer. I paused for a moment. Could this be possible? And then, like in the theater, Allison appeared in overly polite sales mode. She had a big smile on her face when she greeted us. It took a while for her to recognize me. Gail had already moved on. "Michael," she said with a surprised expression on her face. "Hi," I replied. She stood looking at me, then gave me a brief hug. Gail continued to explore the house on her own. Allison and I stood awkwardly for a moment in the kitchen. "This is a beautiful house," I said honestly. "I think we're interested." She stood there looking at me, still surprised by the situation. Finally, she handed me a flyer with information about the house and encouraged me to explore and ask any questions. I caught up with Gail in the backyard by the pool. "I really like it. How about you?" Gail asked. "Do you know who the realtor is?" I asked her. "Yes, I noticed her when we came in," she replied. "Have you noticed? Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Because it doesn't matter," she replied calmly. "Now go and find out the details. We need to move quickly in this market." She added, "I told Allison that we were interested and wanted to make an offer." I asked a few follow-up questions and said we wanted to move quickly. When I said this, Allison just looked at me, not reacting to my words. "I'm a little surprised," she said, not entirely professionally. "I didn't think you'd be interested in a house like this. You understand what the asking price is," and she showed a sheet of paper with the price. "I understand," I assured her. "We understand the cost." She looked at me again, trying to understand why I wanted this luxury house with a pool in this area. "It's just," she began, "this is the type of house I've always wanted. It seemed like it was too much for you." She added, forgetting her professional sales skills. "Sorry," I said neutrally. "When we were together, I also wanted a house like this. The difference is that I was willing to wait until it was possible. I knew we would come to this. We just had different time frames." She just looked at me, understanding what I said. At that moment, Gail, 6 months pregnant, entered the room. "It's good to see you again, Allison," Gail said without much emotion. "And now about the house," she began, and the discussion continued. Later, after we had begun the proposal process, Gail and I walked around the yard again. As we returned to the front and walked to the car, I glanced out the large dining room window. There, sitting at the dinner table, face in her hands, shoulders shaking and tears flowing, was Allison. I couldn't help but think about how her life could have turned out if she had just been patient. It would be too cruel to tell her, "I told you so." The end. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.